Okay, so today, it's sometimes hard to do this when I'm holding it like this. Let's look at a few concepts today. I've gotten through, first of all, my streaming portion where I've streamed like all the most recent ones. So like I caught up. So now I'm going back and streaming some of my older uploads, which I've never streamed, like The Sopranos and some other random stuff. So like when I first started. So I might actually catch up in a reasonable amount of time because whatever, like it's a lot, but then I could always repeat or whatever. So I have a lot of wealth of content though that shows, so it makes you appreciate saving it. It's there forever now on YouTube, and now you can use it for stuff like this, which I didn't expect to really do. But the whole rerun idea is fine. You know, it makes sense for a low viewer person. It's, you know, the main reason why being live is a big deal is if you're reacting to something new that it just came out, or you're watching it as it happens, like the news or the election or something. Or if you have a big following, like a lot of people talking in chat, which in this case you don't because you're a nobody, moron clown like me. Although I am up to 11 followers, which is actually pretty encouraging, even as weird as it seems, because it's just random stuff. But I am chronicling a lot of my old debate points and stuff. So let's do one debate point here. There's a little short clip I saw of Charlie Kirk, where he gets asked, what about all the evil done in the name of religions throughout history, right? Like the Inquisition, Crusades, etc., whatever you want to say. You could point to even more modern examples. And his comeback here is actually the same fallacy that's being used. So his comeback is something along the lines of Joseph Stalin was an atheist and Mao was an atheist, stuff like that. That actually is the same base fallacy that was just asked of him, and it's the wrong answer objectively, because so you're saying that something can be done wrong in the name of atheism, even though that's not even a dogmatic persuasion and it's not an outward state of being the way that a religion is, right? So even in that fallacy, you're more wrong, and you'd be more right in saying that of a religion, but you would still be operating under a fallacy. So the correct way to debunk that would be to say, yes, bad things have been done in the name of religions, like whether it be through the church and history, the idea of how much power they had, like in the feudal times, etc. You could point to any religion. You could say, okay, suicide bombings are done in the name of, the virgins that you're going to get. There's all these sort of misuse of it. So the way you could argue is just because something can be misused, right, or appropriated to some crazy person just says, oh, I did this in the name of God. That doesn't mean that religion has to take ownership of that or be dragged down by its lowest common denominator. So in that sense, you could easily just say, yes, just because something can be misused and done in the name of religion doesn't mean that it actually is what religion is about or caused by it. Before these religions existed, people still did bad things. After they happened, people will still do bad things. If there are people who aren't religious who do bad things, there are people who are religious who do bad things. So the simple answer is just, it's human nature, the inherent state of humanity, that's doing it, right? Which religion is not going to 100% solve, nor is being an atheist supposedly as an outward state, even in this false framing, right? Neither of that is addressed. So it's the same basic fallacy to say correlation is not causation, and also, so again, the fact that Joseph Stalin was an atheist or Mao was an atheist, he says both of those, that's not why they did it, right? Because that would be implying, well, so only atheists have ever done something wrong like that, when that's not true. And again, it's a worse argument that way because it's very overbroad. You can't define or project what an atheist is about. Like, there's no dogmatic, where's the church of atheism that the majority of atheists go to? Where's the acknowledgement of the fact that everybody is born an atheist, so it's not even an outward state of being? You can't apply some sort of preconceived state of being to what an atheist is. It's way too broad. Anybody can be one. Everybody is one when they're born. It's not an outward active state. It's not a ritualistic tendency. It's not that you're going to atheist church every week, right? There's no such thing. So it's way too broad to even make an assumption, but even within that assumption, it's a fallacy. So you're trying to say if Joseph Stalin was religious, he wouldn't have done that. But here's the emperor wears no clothes fallacy with the religion too. If somebody does something bad in the name of it, you'll just disown them and say, oh, well, they're not really religious. So you can never be wrong. It's like, either you do exactly what we want you to do, even if you interpret something differently, or, that's the basic acknowledgement here. Like, okay, so either you do exactly what we want, and you can be considered religious, or anytime you do something we don't approve of, now you're no longer religious. So you can just disown everybody who's part of that. So by that logic, you could do the same the other way. Anybody who's an atheist, you could disown them too and say, well, anytime that they do something wrong, okay, well, they're not really that somehow. It's a nonsense argument, but no, it would be an acknowledgement of human nature, right? People would do this regardless. So religion could just be an excuse or a pretense or overlap, just like not being religious isn't the causal factor. It's a completely nonsense argument. So yeah, if Stalin was just religious and then he did the same thing, what would religious people say? Oh, well, he's not really religious. He's just, we'll disown him if I point to any other figures who actually were, like, I don't like to get caught up on the specific examples though, because that's sort of misframing. Whenever you're in an argument, just bring up Stalin or Mao or Hitler or somebody, that makes an argument. Supposedly it's like a buzzword. But the point is, that, no, that's not why they did it. There's plenty of people who did terrible things without that, or in the name of religion, or because of religion. So all you would say is, okay, it's ultimately human nature. It's not the religion's fault. There's plenty of people who are religious who don't do that. There's some people who have done bad things in the name of it. Just like people have done bad things who are atheists, plenty of people don't do bad things who are atheists. So it's not a causal correlation. It would just be, okay. So yeah, it's the same basic fallacy that you're attributing it to that and say, okay, the problem with the religion is sometimes it'll say things that are more in line with that, like, okay, religion told me to do it and here's where, and people could interpret it that way, and sometimes it is a little bit direct and hostile if you take it literally, so people will sort of adjust it to meet whatever, religion can never be wrong because you'll dictate by the machination process of the time is the real way that people have their beliefs and interests and culture and everything. So anytime religion specifics and you're not taking it exact word by word, otherwise you might be more Amish in a lesser machination process because it's provably written by people, so you're trusting the words of people that way, and you're also saying that you're taking that as an absolute. So at the very least you realize people's ability to manipulate it, right? So the credibility issue comes in, like, well, people can kill one another or do terrible things in the name of religion. That doesn't mean that they're actually right or that's what it's really about, you would say. So why couldn't you believe that the Bible or something written by people could have been misinterpreted, or, ulterior motives and biases and subjective elements don't come into that, right? That could easily be the case. So even if you were to believe it as an absolute, the subjective interpretation and application is still in question, right? So it's not absolute in that sense, like, the interpretive basis, you could say, well, one person reads this and takes it this way and then does something that we don't approve of. And again, you always apply it arbitrarily to the modern state of technology at the time. Like, where does Jesus say to ride in a car and do all this and that? You might say, oh, it doesn't have to say exact things, but it does make plenty of reference, the Bible, to specifics of the time and the era and the technology that they do know about and that is available. So if you were to follow it word by word, you might end up living a much more Amish or minimalistic lifestyle that would be in line with that. There's not so much it doesn't mention this, it doesn't have to mention every little thing, but what it does mention could be followed more precisely, but you'll pick and choose, you'll be selective, you'll take favorites, you'll be like, well, we'll just adapt and adjust to the real defining factor, which is the technology of the time, and we'll fall in line with that, and then we'll just pretend like we're religious. So no matter where technology goes, you'll go with it, right? And then you'll somehow try to change the interpretation of religion to match. So, like, nobody's fooled by that. So if you were, again, that's an absolutist interpretation. It's not saying that, religion is wrong or bad or you shouldn't do it. On the contrary, if you do it, then you better be absolutely consistent, which nobody really is, unless you're, again, in a much more minimalistic state that wouldn't be potentially inconsistent, and it's just, you'll find a way to rationalize it. It's kind of like, you want to wear the cloak of religion, but then you don't want to give up all the modern conveniences that may be completely incompatible with it, or are at least not mentioned within it, and are just something else, right? They're not a product of that. So it'd be the same thing like the Native American argument. Like, people would say, oh, it's an atrocity that the Europeans killed the Native Americans and committed genocide. Everybody wants to say that, but then nobody wants to actually leave the U.S. and say, well, let's give their lands back and go somewhere else, go where our ancestors came from. Right? So you don't want to inconvenience yourself, but you want to still sit on the moral high horse, or, again, wear the flag of religion, the cloak of religion. And then the other point is the simple fact that you're going to put yourself in a position where I had a better way of explaining it. That, see, when you first see something, that's why I should have watched it like here in the first time, but now I just saw it randomly. The fallacy is, again, you're attributing wrongdoing to religion, but there are plenty of people who are and have been religious who don't do bad things, so it's not inherently tied to that. There's also been plenty of wrongdoing. There's plenty of people who are religious that don't commit crimes or do something wrong. There are plenty of people who haven't been religious, right, that have done things that are wrong. So it's not really correlating to it, right? It's not like the majority of people who are religious do something wrong. It's not like the majority of things throughout history that have been wrong necessarily can be attributed to it, although to be fair, you could look at that a little bit, like how people come up. This is a separate thing, but like, you know, you'd say if someone's born in the jungle, this is my thought experiment, and never exposed to the church, they wouldn't be religious. They might come up with their own religion and superstitions over time, which kind of explains how religions came about, that we accept now as something more, but that's all it is. That explains how they came to be some psychological need, peace of mind, superstition from environment around them. But the other point is the fact that you have, you know, it's a case where you would correlate it, but it would be, you know, so many different religions throughout history have existed, and so you could attribute something to that and say even people have said that we're doing it in the name of this, the name of that. So at the very least, you can realize that it can be misattributed, it can be manipulated, it can be used to control people, it can be used to, you know, as a method of justifying things. So even if you don't vouch for that and say, oh, well, that's not really religion, that's not really what it's about, it can clearly be used that way. So you'd at least be careful not to believe subjective human beings and how they use it and interpret it. They could use it for their own personal benefit. That's been shown throughout history. They could use it to justify evil, terrible things that you wouldn't vouch for. So that's the question. It's not a question of the thing that you'll say, well, religion inherently is good and it means to do good and etc. Even if that was true, it can still be misused by people. So that is important. This is the same way that human nature, people would point to, like, well, without religion now you need more structure, and so you can't trust people to be moral, but you can't trust people with religion either, because, again, that's the same point. So it's really human nature that's being called into question, that you have to hold accountable in either case, that, okay, we have to self-govern or work it out, but there's no one-size-fits-all answer, because, again, that's the same point that we're just making, that, oh, religion is perfect and nothing bad ever happens, would be potentially a premise, but then, oh, anytime it's not perfect, we're just going to disown it and say, well, we're just going to disown it and say that that doesn't count. Somebody could be religious. They could be in the church for 20 years and they could be devoutly faithful, and then suddenly they do something wrong, right? Now you'll say, oh, but they didn't really believe. They're not a true believer. So you can never be wrong. It's a non-accountable false absolute. Religion is always right, and anytime it seems to be wrong, one of the members of the clergy and stuff is going to be molesting some kid. Again, it happens. I'm not saying that that's the only reason. There are people who aren't religious who do that too. Like, I'm not attributing it in some base way. I'm saying that certain power that you get, an opportunity, might be defining more so than the specific religion, state, etc. But what I'm saying is, I won't attribute it that way and blame it, but what I will do is say, you don't get to pick and choose then, because then it's not an absolute state, and then it comes down to subjective human interpretation and enforcement. Same thing with morality, like, well, the law is absolutely right, and it's based in morals, and they're absolute, and they come from God, or they're objective, or they're inherent. But also it comes down to subjective human enforcement. What if the court gets it wrong? What if a killer gets away? What if the police themselves are corrupt? So, like, even if you believe in some supposed absolute, it comes down to subjective human enforcement of it, and interpretation and application and all this education, through the church and stuff. It comes down to all these other subjective layers. So there is no absolute there then at all. or the absolute is so flaky that it comes down to us upholding it, which contradicts the whole basis of an absolute, that shouldn't be necessary. So all it would take to defy the supposed absolute is, a subjective human could just say, I don't believe it, or I don't want to do it, or I'll do something different, or I'll ignore it, or I'll apply it in some inconsistent way that, you wouldn't vouch for. So the fact that there's so many variables means that it's anything but absolute, and it comes down to a subjective layer, subjective level. But getting back to the original point is the fact that the original layer was that, again, somebody would attack religion and say, look at all the horrible things through our history that have been done in the name of religion. And you would be correct. There are a number of things you could point to, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily religion's fault. If nobody was religious, bad things would still happen, right? So it's more so human nature, and it could be misused, right, would be the acknowledgement. So I'm not going to necessarily link it fully to religion. But the comeback was instead, right, correlation is not causation, even though in that case it would be attributed directly and say, we're doing this in the name of God, right? Like the white man's burden thing, where it's like, you could say, not everything evil in history is because of race or something, but, right, like it's because, Europeans had better technology, and then that's the equalizing factor, and anybody with the technological advantage in history would do something similar, and people have conquered each other regardless of race, even of the same race, etc., throughout history. It was more of a human nature, opportunity, etc. thing, but when they explicitly say, it's the white man's burden and this and that, and use that to rationalize it themselves, it's still not necessarily because of that, like, it's their choice to do it. But, again, if everybody was the same skin color, nothing wrong would ever happen? Of course not. You see that all the time. People use that example, like, how much black on black crime is there? Right, just to say that it's human on human crime, that it doesn't matter. Right now, can that sometimes be the motivation that somebody has? Like, they'll be divided by religion or race or gender or whatever. That could be a pretense or a reason, but, it's like the term of hate crime is always such a fallacy because, so you're trying to tell me most crimes are done out of love and it's only hate when it's hate for like a group, like, it can't be hate for an individual. Like, somebody hates this person because of their personality or something they did or whatever, something they said, rather than, just who they are as an identity. So what, that's not hate still? Like, it's the same point, like, you hate them for something they did, or it overlaps. Like, somebody has a disagreement with somebody on a personal level, and then they do something, and they happen to be of a different race. Now, every time that happens, you'll attribute it to race, even if it had nothing to do with it. You would say, no, he cheated on me, my wife cheated on me with him, so now that's why they did that, right? But, no, they happen to be different races, so now we'll attribute it to that. Like, the problem there is, you're attributing it to the fact that, right, you can just assume that. So this is the fallacy, like with, the U.S. would be racist. Most countries in the world don't have a tremendous amount of ethnic variety. So if you say, this particular country is 80% of the same race and 20% of all other races combined, so there's not that many opportunities for it, or it's more overt that, like, okay, everybody lives in their own community and there's this implication of whatever, it's like an ethno-state. But with the U.S., why does so much racial disparity happen in the U.S.? Maybe because it's so racially diverse. So now anytime anything happens, if one person in China kills another person in China, the majority of people are Chinese, so you'll say, that's just humans being humans, right? Like, it's just a person hating another person. But as soon as you get out to, in the U.S., now it's a higher likelihood that it's going to be two different races just because it's a more diverse country. Now you'll attribute it to that and say, look how horrible the U.S. is. But the causal correlation is it has a greater diversity of people to begin with. And so because it has that diversity, now anytime anything bad happens, you'll say, it's because of that. Right, whereas if it's the same race, you won't attribute it, and you'll say, it's just a person doing something bad to a person, not because of race. Right, so again, in the U.S., it's more likely that it'll be two races conflicting just because there's more races here. So now anytime anything bad happens, you'll say, it's because of race, when really that opportunity wouldn't have even happened anywhere else because, it's not different races. So you see the fallacy there that, if I create a community with 10 people and 9 of those people, 8 of those people are all the same race, and then you have one of a different race, one of a different race, right? Now, anytime those 8 people have a conflict, you'll just say, oh, look, that's just what people do. But with the other community, if I have 10 people of all 10 different races, now you say, oh, look, every conflict they have is a consequence of their race, because they're all different. But it's only because they're different in the first place. Like, you wouldn't think that way. The conflicts might not have anything to do with that. Sometimes they might, don't get me wrong, but it might have nothing to do with that. But now, anytime anything bad happens, you'll say, oh, it's because of race, right? A white person does something bad to a black person does something bad to a white person. They might even tell you why, like, oh, I just don't like them as a person, or because of something they did, something they said, like people have personal conflicts and grievances. It's not, how often does this happen? Like, somebody's just walking down the street, and anytime they see somebody of a particular identity, oh my goodness, they're going to do something bad to them, right? Like, usually it takes something more than that. Like, oh, the mere existence of this other race in your presence is enough to make you do something, but then you would have done it a lot sooner because you can't help but encounter that. So there's always a conflation of like race and culture too. But getting back to the point is that, again, I wouldn't attribute it. So, and again, even if you were to say that, the argument for atheism would be a lot weaker against it, because you'd say, well, that's more broad and doesn't have a particular dogmatic persuasion or element to it. Okay, let me finish that discussion, and then I'll look at a few things here, like... Okay, so again, somebody says, oh, a lot of evils have been done throughout history in the name of religion or because of religion. But again, it's not necessarily tied to that, even though it can be misused for that reason. I wouldn't use that to categorically dismiss religions, but it would at least put a caution that despite the supposedly absolute nature of religion, it comes down to human subjective interpretation, and so it can be misused, and so be wary of people using the cloak of religion to justify certain things, and also be wary of its supposedly absolute nature, because it clearly can at least be misinterpreted, misused, etc. But other than that, I wouldn't categorically dismiss it. It can have positive effects, it can give people structure, etc. Right? So we'll leave it at a pretty mild-mannered interpretation of that claim that a lot of things can be used to justify evil human behavior, right? Like the lyrics of a song could be used to try to assassinate somebody, or, oh, it's not the song's fault, or you got to be able to separate fiction from reality, like violent video games, or all these different things. So people can use anything to justify their innate, inherent nature, tendency, desire, whatever it is that they might do. So I'm never going to attribute it to that. It's ultimately human nature. That can be an influence. It can be a powerful influence. So you can always consider that. But I wouldn't blame it, and I wouldn't dismiss it that way. Again, correlation isn't causation, and overlapping doesn't mean that that's inherent to it. Right? Don't specify the conflict and say, oh, it's only because of religion that bad things happen. But then people have done bad things, again, outside of that, before certain religions, in the name of different religions, so it's not a specific religion that is at fault. It could be because of various other reasons, right? So it's ultimately human nature, so I'm not going to do that. But then, again, Charlie Kirk uses the same exact fallacy to say, well, look, Stalin was an atheist, so, you could use that same argument to say, well, bad things still happen outside of religion, but the way he frames it is almost as if to blame atheism and say, oh no, it's because of atheism, because bad things happened in the name of atheism too, like Stalin did this and Mao did this. So again, that's the same fallacy to say, well, in the name of Christianity, you had Inquisition, Crusades, you had a lot of other issues, right? And so all the time you have with Islam potential terrorism or bombing. Again, I'm not saying that that's something you'd even vouch for within that, but it's clearly attributed to it. So now you could point to a lot of things. I mean, much of human history was done at times in the name of religion, or with at least a religious monarch or government that would sometimes, veil itself in religion. So the problem with that is to bring up, okay, other bad things have happened by atheists is fine, right? I would just say more broadly that, okay, it's human nature, so human beings have done things that we would condemn for various reasons throughout all of human history at various times. So I wouldn't just say it that way, like, I wouldn't say it in a narrowing scope, because you have the ability to look, like, religions could cease to exist. People are still going to do bad things. Everybody could be religious. People are still going to do bad things. So it's not as simple as just saying that one way or the other. But, again, Stalin was an atheist. Mao was an atheist. So therefore, again, what argument does that really make? And the answer is, it's a bad false duality framing, because they attack religion and say, oh, look at all the bad things associated with the religion. You just fire back and say, oh, look at all the bad things associated with atheism, as if it's even an outward state, as if you can even define it, as if you can even pigeonhole people. Not saying all Christians think alike or exactly the same, but there's at least more of a dogmatic element to it than atheism. Atheism is not a belief system. Atheism is not even an outward position, right? Atheism is literally the state in which you are born. All human beings are born atheist, and then you can be indoctrinated into the church or whatever, etc. And I'm not even condemning that. I'm just saying, so maybe the process by which it happens at a young age and things like that, but I'm not necessarily condemning that. What I am doing is I'm putting it in a perspective that again, it's way too broad. Like, what is an atheist? You cannot define that in any way. It's so vague. It's so broad. Every human being on the planet, when they're born, is an atheist. Billions of people could be atheists. There's not one way of thinking that you can pigeonhole people into at all. So it's very hard to attack that. It's the outward insistence and sort of the closed structure contrivance that you're defined by not being religious, not by being religious, but being religious, especially a specific religion, is a specific outward state of being. You're a Christian, you're a Muslim, you're this, you're that. Right? That's an outward specific state that you are doing and have to be exposed to. Whereas atheism is just an inherent state of being that anybody could be. So it's not even a good label, not even a good term. You're just simply alive and you simply exist. And then if you're indoctrinated into a church, or if you outwardly believe something, that's fine, but right, you're defined by the outward practice. You're the claim maker. The burden is on the claim maker, not on the atheist, because that's not even a label. It's not even valid. Again, it's a fallacy that, like, you're defined by what you don't do rather than what you do, as in, when do we do that in other areas of life? Like, if you're walking, you're a walker, right? Defined by that, as if in contrast to driving a car. Like, no, that's not even a good example. Like, you're a breather, right? You breathe oxygen, as if that's an outward thing, which even that is still an outward thing, but it's like, it would be the framing of, like, even those aren't a good example. It has to be something that's just like, I don't know, just the term atheist is itself a fallacy, because you're saying somebody isn't something, not that they are something. So there's nothing outward that you have to do to be that, and you can't label or define or restrict that. And so again, on the other side, you can say, well, even by attacking atheism that way, you're actually exposing a fallacy, because you can more directly tie wrongdoing to the dogmas of religions that have been used to justify it, and certain things that are in religion that are outwardly prejudicial or otherwise. So you could tie it to that more. I'm not really tying it to that, but you could tie it to that more because there's a more specific dogma in play. Whereas with atheism, it's so broad, it's so neutral, it's so objective, it's so just nothing. There's nothing intrinsic to it. You can take it anywhere you want because it's not even a belief system. It's just it's the lack of a supposed structured belief system. But it's just all of human ideas, all potential is there. So you can't even pass judgment on that. So when you say that, oh, Stalin is atheist, is that why he did what he did? If he had a religion, supposedly, would that mean he wouldn't do anything wrong? Because we've seen other people do things that are bad. Not everybody who's atheist does something bad, so it's the same thing. So you're falling for the same trap and making sort of a juvenile argument, but that's actually worse by the same criteria. Because, like, what atheist dogma would you point to that, oh my goodness, atheists believe blank, which, again, there is no blank that you can even put in there. It would be left blank, but atheists believe blank, supposedly, and so therefore that's why they do bad things. At least with religion, you could say that. Christians believe certain things, right? Like, oh, the homosexuality is wrong, so now because of that, they might go out and do something bad for them. I'm not saying that really categorically, but that you could at least attach something to it, the argument. Whereas here, there's nothing to attach to it. You could say, well, in the absence of some outward dogmatic persuasion, now you might be more likely to commit a crime or do something immoral because you're not treating morality as a false inherent contrivance response, false absolute, because God's saying it, but that doesn't even work because you could just believe in a basic sense of morality. Just say, okay, I don't want to kill somebody because I don't want to die myself, like a golden rule or so many other. You don't need religion specifically, you don't need a particular faith, and it's so overbroad because you have a case where, again, it's a very undefined, but by definition it's undefined, right? That's the trap you fall into. You're going to say, oh, this person's an atheist, and that's why Joseph Stalin did what he did, let's say. But you're saying it's not because he believed something and that made him do it, like the influence of that belief. No, you're saying he doesn't believe something and that's why he did it. But, so in other words, based on his lack of belief, you're doing something bad, but that doesn't even make any sense because it's not, that wouldn't tell you to do something, that would tell you nothing. That would be just blank, again. So what you do with that blank slate is up to you. You could do something good with it, you could do something bad with it, you could, do nothing with it. So yeah, that's taking it to a very ignorant place because you're saying, you're just attaching something to it that isn't really there. So it's the worst argument to try to make. Right, if you were to try to really have this debate out, you can't really make an argument there because, again, an atheist doesn't have to, it's so broad. Like, you could even be open-minded, agnostic, although these terms are all fallacies, honestly, but, you could leave the door open. You're not asserting that, oh, there is no God or there could never be a God. You could just leave it vague. Like, we don't know all the details. We don't know the specifics. All the dogmatic aspects of it have been contrived by human beings who seek to manipulate it or, twist it to their own ends, which we've proven already that you can do because of all the wrongdoing, potentially. So you can see that it's manipulated, and the point is that you have a situation where you could have an atheist who argues against the existence of God and says, okay, absolutely 100% there is no God, or you could have one that simply says, I don't know, we can't know. Another one that says they just don't care, it doesn't matter, right? Like, even if there was a God, he doesn't want to be worshipped, or if they wanted to be worshipped, they would make us do it. And then there's some fallacy, too, with that Cliff guy who said, well, he wants to give you free will to be able to worship or not worship. But so then by that logic, my free will is his result of him. So therefore, anything I do with that free will is also a result of him. So in that case, it doesn't matter, right? If God really cared, like, oh, God doesn't want you to kill anybody, then he wouldn't give you the ability or the capacity to do it, whether physically or mentally or however, right? So in other words, God doesn't care. So that means if you do something wrong, according to God, supposedly, as people say it, that's actually okay because he gave you the free will to do it. So it's his fault and his will, and there you go. So, like, it's this sort of internal fallacy that on the subjective level, you have to pretend it's an absolute. Like, again, it can be a preferential basis, it can be functional, but that's not the argument. The argument is an absolute, like, well, you have this element of okay, you have this element because an atheist could be, again, just that's how you're born. So you don't have any outward position. You just don't know. You're just an ignorant animal, right, with slightly greater self-awareness, and we get all egotistical and think we need all the answers of the universe. as a result. But okay, so you just don't know, you just don't care, you're indifferent. There could be a God, but we don't know it yet. There's not enough proof, so you're just leaving the door open, but you're not going to go for some heavy-handed assertions. You're realizing the subjective human nature and manipulation of it, interpretation of it. You're also realizing that you could argue directly against it, but you could also say, the specifics of it are the issue. Like, even if a God existed, like the boring God example that I always give. Okay, so let's say there was a God that created everything, and that's it, period. There's no dogma, there's no influence on humans, we're just some random aberration, slightly greater self-awareness than other animals. That's it. So what about that? So there's no morality, there's no sense of purpose. We wouldn't know it if, it would be a total mystery to us. Why does it have to be that, God created us in his image, or God has all these moral standards and decrees and all this convenient dogma and things that line up with our own subjective morality and preference, or like, no, forget about all that. So you could believe in God then, but what would it matter? Right, so you're doing it for yourself, you're doing it for your desire, you're doing it for peace of mind, the cui bono effect that I use to show there's a clear benefit that you're getting out of it. There's an incentive. So if the argument's an incentive, that doesn't mean it's true or accurate. So even if you want to argue on a functional basis, well, if it makes you feel good, then what's the difference? If it gives you peace of mind, if it makes you behave better, structure, fine. But then make the functional argument and say, that doesn't mean it's true, that doesn't mean it's absolute, that doesn't mean we have to get caught up on the specifics of a particular dogma, especially within how arbitrary that can be. Like saying, oh, look how productive it can be. China can be productive, Soviet Russia can be productive. That doesn't mean that what you're believing in is true or absolute or justified, or that it can't be misused, or that it can't be, used for negative purposes, even by its own pretenses for which it exists. Like, so whatever, that's always a bad argument. But yeah, atheism is overbroad of a term. It's just not a good term. You wouldn't have much of a burden to argue, because this is always the false duality framing that happens. Like, that's so juvenile, but you could observe a process in nature, and then they'll, this was like some stand-up comedy, like Dane Cook or somebody back in the day, or I remember seeing this. Oh, atheists think you become a tree. Okay, so what happens to a physical body? Like, this is 7th grade science class or below. What happens to a physical body if it's put in the ground or in the soil or anywhere like that? What happens to it? We have plenty of evidence, plenty of data to show it, unless you want to just deny basic things like that. You could... Okay, let's go over something from an old short story of mine. This is just like a scene from it's a short story about Judith Polgar and the Laszlo Polgar, her dad. So this is a great scene from it that I love, which is the daughters are in their room, right? The Sophia... I can't even remember all their names. Judith, Sophia, and something else is the third one. Susan, Sophia, and Judith. And basically, the mom's arguing with him like, oh, you're treating them like guinea pigs, like they're just, test subjects in some experiment, which is basically what he's doing, the Polgar experiment. And then he says back, maybe you're forgetting that they're people too, that they're humans too. And then he says back, it's a game. They have the privilege to play a game, to live in a game, he says like that. Chess is the way the world should be, like perfectly systematic, balanced, and a true meritocracy. Not like this. And then he points out, like, world around us with, full of appearances and lies and corruption and stuff like that, because some event happens. Again, it's not really a true story of things that happened in their life, but this event happened earlier that, like, what he was going to get, like, a promotion or some better position at work, and somebody else gets it because they have, like, a family connection or whatever like that. So that's what he's partly upset about. So yeah, that dialogue is really good. Like, they're in the other room and they're, maybe Judith or somebody is listening in on that. But the mom is yelling like, you're treating them like guinea pigs, like they're just test subjects in an experiment. Have you forgotten that they're just little girls, that they're people, that they're humans, something like that? And then he says, it's a game. They have the privilege to live their lives in a game. Chess is the way the world should be. Perfectly organized, systematic, a true meritocracy. Not like this. And then he gets mad and sort of points outwardly, like if it was a scene that I'm directing in a movie. All the lies, corruption, appearances, everything like that. And he's basically getting upset because, like, oh, look at all the work I've done in my life, how hard I've worked. They get to sit there and play a game, and you're acting like, oh, that should be a privilege. It's a game. It's for fun. Obviously they're treating it like work, but, they should feel privileged and happy to be able to do that, rather than have to deal with all the bullshit that he's dealt with, that they've dealt with in their life, working in other, environments. And so now you have a situation where yeah, that's the point, is that you have this that was just one good scene, and then there's like this ongoing again, I took a lot of liberties with it, but that aren't necessarily true. But basically he has like a rivalry with this rich guy who is like sponsoring other players, and this guy tells Laszlo, like, oh, you can't. They know each other somehow from way back, and there's like a bitterness and rivalry. So it's like this guy became very rich and Laszlo didn't. So, but this guy always liked chess and wanted to be good at it, but he wasn't able to, despite even now his money and his wealth. So it's like he tries to sponsor some other players with his money, and he says, like, oh, a girl is never going to be better than, like, these people I've sponsored or whatever, right, like this level. And then eventually he's so mortified by that. And I think that's actually how I end the story. Spoilers, I guess. He actually kills himself. His butler comes, like, you have a call from, which at this time in history maybe doesn't even make a whole lot of sense. But you have some sort of message from Laszlo. And then he's reading in the paper, like, that Judith won some big game, beat, like, Gary Kasparov or whatever, some big event. It might have been earlier than that, something big, though, that she did. And then he actually kills himself because it was so mortifying that not only did he fail, but Laszlo, to be good at chess, but Laszlo had succeeded in a manner of speaking that, like, even though he didn't do it, right, there's some promise or bet made like that, like, oh, I could have become a GM, or I would have been better than you, but I didn't have time because I was working and taking care of my family. And then they make, like, some sort of bet. And then, obviously, he proves it through the kids that even if he didn't do it, he was able to, that, oh, Judith's at 27 and the other two are like 24, 2500. So it's obviously a pretty sound experiment. It's not like a fluke. Okay, so here let's do a random YouTube session. ASMR eating. I rarely do this where I'm eating while driving, actually, because normally what I get isn't suitable to eat while driving, but this kind of is. So I've been watching some of those Charlie Kirk type things where, just in shorts, where he's like very stupidly, I don't know, he's just very stupidly asserting things. Like, that's one of the worst arguments. Morality is objective, and they try to do like this lame technique of, you can't call the Holocaust evil or something like that, as if, again, it's just like a juvenile thing. You can obviously subjectively call it wrong, and that's the whole point. But this notion that, it's objectively wrong, well, if it was objectively wrong, then it wouldn't be able to happen, right? Either according to the laws of nature or according to something else, like God would prevent it, So even if you want to use that term, like, you probably don't know what it means, but if you say it's subjective, then that means your objectivity is kind of weak and useless, because your objectivity is weak, because all it takes to define some supposed objective truth is then just subjective human action. So subjectively, you can just say, you'll do something different than the objective reality, and you can just do that. So if you can do that subjectively, that means it's not objective, because it comes down to the whims of subjective humanity, and it comes down to even relying on subjective humans to enforce it. So the inference with that is intellectually dishonest, because then you'd be like, well, see, you're wrong because you don't say that, but you can say it subjectively. So the way to say it best is like, okay, somebody who's religious or however else you define this, right, would objectively say that, okay, you can assert morality objectively, but then what good does it do you? You still have to rely on subjective people to enforce it, police and courts and everything. Right, so it's not a very strong standard at the very least, because you have okay, it's subjective, it's absolute, it's inherent, all three of these terms that are used that way. But then all it takes to define that objective reality is, a subjective human being can just decide to do something different. Like, let's say killing somebody. There's a difference between consensus and reality. Like, that just because 99.9% of people agree and we want that to be true and we enforce it and everything like that, doesn't mean it actually is true. And that's useful to acknowledge, because then you realize, like, okay, because it's not true objectively, we have to work to uphold it. If it was true objectively, then we wouldn't have to do anything. Like, give you an example of something that is objective, like, the fact that you need oxygen to survive, right? You don't need to worry about that or debate it or enforce it or whatever. And if you subjectively believe something different, you couldn't defy that. It would still be true, right? Despite your subjective intention. Whereas, like, it's objectively wrong to kill a person. Okay. And then tomorrow somebody subjectively decides that's not true and goes out and kills somebody and does it anyway. So I can accept that your definition of objectivity is so weak that all it would take is subjective preference or different interpretation, etc., to defy it. Once you realize it's not objective, what you want to be true, etc., all these collectively agreed upon standards, now you can figure out, like, okay, how can we best achieve it? How can we best enforce and uphold and achieve it? So it's the same result that you're getting to, and it's the same practical, observable reality that you see, where on a daily basis we do have to constantly indoctrinate people, we have to reinforce, we have to social stigmatize, we have to, enforce through police and laws and courts and all this kind of stuff. So we're sort of spoiled in society that way, that we it's a way to just because we actively uphold and enforce something doesn't mean that actually makes it true. But we do it so well that we start to believe it. Like, okay, we're born into this society and we're indoctrinated a certain way, and then we have constant enforcement and law, so we sort of take for granted that our artificial construct of a society is actually real and absolute, when really it's just that construct. Just because it's well constructed, consistently constructed, collectively agreed upon, that still doesn't make it true. That's why we have to remain vigilant in order to constantly uphold it, as we actively have to do. So it's not useful even to say it's subjective, because you can still subjectively do it or do something else or defy it, and you can also still do something else, which is you still require active upholding on a subjective level. If you say, like, okay, we need laws, we need indoctrination, we need social stigma, we need reinforcement constantly. So if you realize that, then there would be no need of anything else in terms of, there'd be no need for any of that if it was actually absolute. So your absolute they both come to the same thing. Like, you say it's absolute, or objective, or inherent, but then you still have to actively uphold it on a subjective level. And then also, if you say it's just subjective and morality isn't objective, you still have to actively uphold it. So either way, you have to uphold it. So it doesn't really matter if you do that, right? Like, the distinction is insignificant. We're looking at the functional, practical, observable, everyday basis that we live in, not some idyllic standard, because we're so spoiled and coddled by society that we take it as a false inherent contrivance response state of like we construct these things in response to the inherent reality or our inherent nature, and just because we construct that doesn't mean that makes it true. That just means that that's what we prefer, that's what's useful, that's what's what we value. So I love the sort of gotcha attempt that is. Asking whether morality is objective, or, like, again, you go to the Holocaust. Can you say that the Holocaust is objectively wrong? Yes, I can. I can subjectively say, as a subjective human being, that it's objectively wrong. I would be kind of not understanding what the word objective actually means, but either way, it would require subjective intervention to stop something objectively. It would require subjective intervention to stop something objectively wrong from happening. So if it comes down to that subjective level, right, like it took subjective armies and war and everything like this to bring that to an end, or it would take, on a more micro sense, like it would take like subjective constant reinforcement and upholding of something. So regardless whether you say, it really is a juvenile nonsense kind of point. I would just say yes to try to deal with the bait of it. Yes, as a subjective human being, I will say it's subjectively wrong, even though that just shows I don't know what the word objective actually means. and I would still be faced with the everyday reality of having to subjectively uphold and prevent something that is supposedly objectively wrong from happening, using subjective human tools like law enforcement, police, court system, social stigma, social indoctrination, etc. So I'd be faced with the subjective reality that we have to actively uphold it on a subjective level, and we can discuss how to best achieve that. But I can still believe in pretense, I guess, because I don't know what the word objective means, that it is indeed objective, if that makes me feel better. So either way, I'm still beholden to the subjective reality that we have to actively uphold it and try to do that. I don't know what I even want to watch, but let's see what this is. Counterexample, something. I don't know, it's like people will assert that, like, something is objectively evil because it's evil. And again, the vast majority, 99.99% of people may agree with that, but you're just looking at a functional basis. Like, yes, that might be what human beings decide, right? We don't want to die, we don't want to be killed. So, of course, we're going to condemn murder, and we're going to construct, structures to try to prevent it. That's perfectly reasonable, and we can discuss how to best do that. But there's a difference between doing that and meaning that it's actually true. The best way to do it is just, how is it achieved? Like, how do we uphold objective morality? We do it on a subjective level. Even having these discussions is kind of proof of that. The fact that they're necessary, the fact that we even have to debate it, that we can debate it. Right, objective reality is something more in nature, like, this is just how a natural process works, and sometimes our technology obscures that a bit, I guess, because you could say, well, we can try to subvert that a little bit with technology, but still, it's like, it's just dumb. Like, what point does it prove? Okay, it is objective, so let's just go about subjectively upholding it, then. Whereas if something was truly objective, you wouldn't need to, or you wouldn't even be able to defy it then, that way. Like, what do you think the definition of objective is? Like, this is where it kind of just bothers me. These are supposedly intelligent people, right, making this argument. So the word objective, like let's look up like an actual dictionary definition. Why not? Because to me, maybe I misunderstood because of how people are using it, but it means something that, look, a person or their judgment, not influenced by personal feelings or opinions in considering or representing facts. Historians try to be objective and impartial. So you would just say the event that happened. That's a good example too. Like, a historian wouldn't say that, oh my goodness, this event was evil. They would just say what the event was, and in great detail. Here's what happened in history. Then we can condemn it and try to stop something similar from happening by saying it's bad, it's evil, but it's quite narcissistic to think that people can even make an objective claim. You can make more so an objective observation, right, which we can do in science, but that's a little bit different still because you have, it's an observation more so than that. So if you observe in nature that killing is objectively wrong, then you would have to explain how so much killing happens between animals, other, life forms, even between people. How does it happen then if it's objectively wrong? people are mistaking the word objective for like, just right, like whether you agree, but that defeats the whole purpose. Even the framing of the question makes no sense. Would you, a subjective human being, agree or say that something is objective? Well, considering that I'm not a god myself or some other objective being, right, despite my reputation for sometimes trying to be objective, sure, but just because you're asking that, do you subjectively agree that something is objectively wrong? Well, the fact that I would need to or be able to should tell you right there that it's not objective, that you even have to ask the question. So it's a false framing that, look at this person, he's not saying that the Holocaust is objectively wrong because it's within your subjective capability to make an objective claim, I guess. I don't know how, but it would be something outside of your... Or yeah, maybe it's a different form of the word objective that we could use here. It should be the objective of society to uphold our subjective morality, but that doesn't mean that it's actually objective in the other sense of the word, that, that would mean it goes without saying, it's inherent, it's just self-evident, right? Nature would take care of it, or nature or God or whatever you're deferring to would take care of it. Yeah, some of these, and that sort of environment is annoying too, because it'll be like people getting ridiculed and it's more sort of short form. But I think they let that guy talk for a while, though. There's a couple people who have been asked that, but it's so weak, though. It's similar to something that people were saying with what was it that I was talking about? Like, Noah Lyles with whether the NBA championship is the world championship. And it's not a question of whether we agree that, it's the highest level of competition in the NBA and stuff like that, right? People somehow take it as a slight. Saying morality isn't objective doesn't mean you don't personally agree with it, or that you're somehow arguing against it, right? It just means it's not objective, and we have to uphold it on a subjective level, which is what we observe every day in our lives. But what, like, Noah Lyles said was, it's not the world championship. That doesn't mean it's not the highest level of competition. It just means it's not the world. It's called National Basketball Association for a reason. Yes, it has foreign players, but like it's a state playing against a state, right? Like Oklahoma City, city playing against a city. So how can it be world championship when only one country and its different cities compete? Whereas, in Olympics, etc., you can say world because it's the different countries of the world competing. So again, that doesn't mean that it's better, that the world championship means more, or that we're denigrating the NBA. You can say an NBA championship, a National Basketball Association in the United States, that championship is more meaningful, more competitive, etc., than the world scale, than the world championship, like Olympics, etc. But even if it's more competitive, that doesn't make it suddenly a world championship. That's just a semantics issue. Like, people get overly defensive, like you're trying to berate it or diminish it, but just on an objective level, it has national in the name. Right, National Basketball Association. So you have just that. So it's not denigrating it. You can still say it's the most competitive, but one of them consists of one country, one of them consists of several countries. So obviously one of them has to do with the world, and one of them just has to do with the one country. Even if you want to say how diverse the NBA has become, that's still not really fair to say that. So that's why sometimes people will take things like personally or take it as a false duality. Right, that because you just simply follow the actual semantics of it, the word objective means it's something outside of human subjective influence or agreement or perception. So, control, basically. And it really just comes down to wanting to believe something. Like, people want to believe it's inherent, but you see the reality that it's not. Right, so again, even if I concede that like, okay, it's subjective, but it still requires us to actively uphold it in terms of laws and police and everything here. And you can say, well, of course that's necessary, but that occurs still at the subjective level, because even if you want to say, okay, they should be trained and this and that, there's at least room for error and subjective interpretation. So now you have a situation where you have a situation where as a subjective human being, I can only make subjective claims. So in my subjective opinion, I will say it's wrong, right? With objectivity, you can't really make an objective claim because a claim is subjective. You can make an objective observation. And so if I observe, okay, let's say killing a person is objectively wrong, I can also still observe that that's not objectively true because it comes down to our own human enforcement of it. It's not objectively wrong by the laws of nature because animals kill each other all the time. It's not objectively wrong by human standards even at the human level because people are still able to kill one another, right? So that's why we have to condemn it in the first place, to discourage people from doing that. And we have laws and, all these different constructs that we create to try to prevent it. So that would be a concession that is subjective because we have to uphold and maintain it at the subjective level constantly. We have to put forth constant effort, like, we have to have police, we have to have courts, we have to have social stigma, social indoctrination. So if you have that, that's useful, that's a good thing, and we should debate how to best achieve it within that framework, but it's not objective. If it, I don't know, I feel like I could say the same thing a million times, but I can't believe how, I get it. It's one of those, you cannot dissuade with the reason why it came about by desire arguments, but it's not even useful. Like, it doesn't matter. Okay, it's subjective, but let's get back to reinforcing it on a subjective level, which the act of even having that discussion is a form of it. You're trying to socially stigmatize and ridicule somebody who dares to say that the word objective means what it actually means instead of something that you just want to believe. Imagine even asking that. That's like saying, ask a human for their opinion on some objective reality. Like, ask me, okay, do human beings need oxygen to survive? No, they don't. You know what I mean? So in my subjective opinion, they don't, but in reality, they still do. but my opinion doesn't change it. Whereas with this, okay, killing a person is wrong, but then people still do it. People can still do it, and on a subjective level, they do it. Like, all it would take is their subjective acknowledgement, like, or disacknowledgement. Like, they could just say, you know what, today I'm having a bad day, I feel like doing something. Now, we can all condemn it and say it's wrong, and we can punish them for it to try to prevent people from doing it, but if it was objectively wrong, there would be no need, because you would have it would be, again, self-evident within the laws of nature that you just wouldn't even be able to do it. That would be something that's objectively wrong, quote unquote, is like, you know, human beings can't fly. That would be something, you know, it's objectively wrong for humans to fly. Now you could say, well, we make a plane and technology, but, or we could even bioengineer something, so I get it, but at least in their inherent state. So that would be the same argument you could make here. In their inherent state, human beings have the nature that they would do anything, right? They can just do whatever they want, but anything they're physically capable of doing, they can just do. There is no standard. But then we can say, okay, that might be how you are in your natural state, but we can still try to create a different state, right, that we prefer, that's better. So it's not a functional argument, though. It's always something lesser. It was just so dumb. That's one of the worst things I've ever seen, because the problem is he would cut you off, or the cheering and jeering would kind of do it, but the conclusion is that whether it's subjective or not, in your subjective opinion, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of what it means for something to be objective, but it doesn't change the reality that you have to actively uphold it on an everyday basis, like whether you individually or society, you know, collectively through its laws and all these things. Like you can ask it that way: are laws objective? And the answer would be, of course not, because they change at the whims of a subjective person on an everyday basis. But just because we take one that goes without saying, like, well, killing a person is wrong, even there's some subjective interpretation, like, well, what if it's self-defense, this and that, but but even that, because it's collectively agreed upon and seems so obvious, right, it doesn't mean that. It's the same fallacy we saw in the other clip. So here's the way a quote-unquote atheist, even though that term itself is kind of stupid and it's a non-term, but would view something like morality. They would view it on a practical, observable, functional basis, like, you know, a golden rule standard, like you don't want to be killed, so you don't kill other people, or, you know, if you decide collectively, 99.9% of people, or the vast majority of society agrees on something, so we make a law, and we prevent people from doing it, or we punish them to try to prevent future people from doing it. So, the point there being that, you know, we can agree on that, and it's useful, and that's what the practical reality is. So you can act all, you know, high and mighty and act like, oh no, it's objective, how dare you say it's not objective. Meanwhile, in the real world, we have to sit down here and come up with some laws made by subjective people that change from day to day, which shows they're subjective and not absolute, not inherent. We have to decide collectively as a society which ones we want to enforce, how we go about best enforcing them. So we can make an actual logical discussion where we discuss how can we best achieve and uphold our subjective morality, that we, again, largely collectively agree upon, especially on the major things like killing somebody, etc. So we can discuss how to best enforce it, and the fact that we need to, on a subjective level, enforce it with, police and everything. Or you could, we could discuss how to best enforce it. So the point is that that would be the more practical discussion, but instead you want to act like it's some big deal, like, oh, you're just wrong because you're just a bad person. How could your view possibly be anything, even though you're just observing something? That's the problem with objectivity, is, again, I always say it's not useful. It doesn't comfort us. It doesn't revolve around us. It doesn't cater to us, right? Objective reality is really something distasteful to people because it doesn't treat human beings as the center of the universe, but that's okay because we can do that ourselves. We construct, societies and different things that would allow us to do that, as in, that's what our laws, that's what our system is about, that even though it's not objective reality, that, something is wrong to hurt people, whatever, we enforce it so that in the absence of objectivity or the objective reality of that, we have the need then to enforce it. And the way that we enforce it would have to be on the subjective level, because otherwise, I don't know how else you're doing it. Like, because human beings are subjective, human beings are changing from moment to moment, even where they decide to whether to even enforce it or what to do, whether to follow something, whether not to do it. So I guess I'll end up just not really watching anything. But no, those are terrible arguments. Like, is somebody, what did he use? Like, Jeffrey Dahmer objectively wrong? You know what? He is objectively wrong. So how is he able to defy objective reality and truth, whether it be God or just the laws of nature, both of which, again, those can be considered objective? How is he able to defy all that and do it anyway? So basically you're saying that something can be objectively wrong and people can just subjectively decide to do it anyway. So that's cute, I guess. Like, what strength does that really have? So then it's not even useful to say it's subjective. Like, what does it do? Again, if you say it's subjective, you have to enforce it with laws, etc. If you say it's subjective, you have to enforce it with laws, etc. So, like, what is the point? And again, it's trying to create some division unnaturally, because it's like we can all agree on a functional basis, right? As we partake in society, like, okay, killing a person, you shouldn't do it. It's wrong. And it's wrong in our subjective collective contrivance. That's why we outlaw it. That's why we punish it, stigmatize it. So so that's the whole point. Is like, why should it require all of that if it was objective? So at the very least, objectivity isn't useful. You'll say, well, God decrees. God says it's objectively wrong, and then God proceeds to let people do it anyway and leaves it up to people, again, in their own subjective level, to try to prevent it from happening, or doing it in the first. It allows that. So it's objectively wrong, but it comes down to our subjective decision making as far as whether we want to do it or not, or whatever, how we prevent it. So it's the biggest non-argument ever. Like, what point does it really make? You still have to do it either way, right? Subjectively enforce something. So again, absolute would also mean the same thing. Like, if something's absolute, it doesn't come down to us or what we think about it or our, subjective interpretation. If something is inherent, also true, because you can defy the inherent state and say, well, the laws of nature allow all of these things inherently, but we can actively try to counteract them. Like, the laws of nature would prevent us from, or would allow people to kill each other, but then we can still defy it. It doesn't mean you have to accept it and have a purely naturalistic view, like, oh, that's how it is in nature. Nature doesn't stop us, so therefore it's okay to do it. No, you can still say, I'm going to use my brain and interpret and say, you know what, even though it's not objective, I'm going to go and decide to uphold it, right, to try to make it true, or not even make it true, but make it the functional, practical reality in front of us. Maybe one pitfall of trying to drive while eating, but generally I was fine. Just like one thing went a little bit off. Normally I don't eat things that you can eat while driving, so it doesn't matter. Let's react to something here. This random clips that I've been seeing on YouTube, like King of Queens, that I saw when I was younger a little bit, that I've been watching clips of this for some reason. And of course Carrie is extremely toxic and bitchy, and you could joke and use that to justify like why she ends up with this let's say less than slender gentleman, despite being relatively attractive. Again, it's all subjective, but why would somebody like that end up with somebody like Doug? Oh, because of her bitchy personality, perhaps. So Carrie finds out she's evil, starting in 3, 2, 1. No. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I love that episode where they go to the food clinic, the therapy. Easily self-aware. Why are we in the dark doing this shit? She's just so bitchy though, but she's a strong alpha woman too, because she always has a good job and everything. You have the right to be a little bitchy there. That should have been how it ended. She becomes a lawyer from a paralegal. I like how they're showing this though, like actually going back in time. This is a pretty good breaking of the fourth wall. She was maybe jealous. It took her this long to realize She's a toxic bitch. Is that because he was freaked out? It's a good compliment to give him, I mean. Oh, look at her being self-reflective. I like how she's at least acknowledging that. But as with every sitcom, by the end of the episode, they'll go back to their old ways. Like, Jerry could propose to Elaine in that one episode, and then, by the end, oh, I've changed my mind, and then everything's back to normal. Like, fucking, like it's just another day. But no, like, there's a really good episode where she's supposed to go to anger management or something, and he's supposed to go to a food therapy, but then he goes to something else, like abusive couple therapy. Here he finds Doug at the club. Or that's one of the funniest moments too, where she finds him in the Chinese restaurant working, and then he goes up to the apartment. Carrie finds Doug at the club, starting in 3, 2, 1. Some of these have been recently uploaded, too, by the official channel. I don't know why they're still doing this. They'll end up uploading every single clip ever. Or yeah, he's pretending to be working late, probably. Along came a spider. Or yeah, it's a bald cap. They did, like, for some flashback episodes, they give him a bald cap that's really bad. And then they have, like, an ad-lib or some line that's, like, Brainiac. Doug calls him Brainiac. So he goes with Spence instead of Deacon. But he was lying, probably like, oh, Deacon's suffering and I'm helping him. Because I guess he's broken up with Kelly. At this point, it must be. She's only happy if he's miserable, as usual. Just remember, you chose this. You chose to be married. This is where society folds on itself like, oh yeah, let's watch more of those OnlyFans fucking podcast clips. It's a pretty good show, actually, but the whole premise of sitcoms is always so dumb. Like, you want to come home from your job, and then you want somebody else to live their mundane life. Right, like, is it really the most exciting subject matter possible? Like all the OnlyFans podcast things that I've been debunking. And again, I'm not necessarily taking the side of OnlyFans girls as much as I'm just shutting down some of the heavy-handed outward. It would be the same as if like somebody said, everybody should do OnlyFans and OnlyFans is the best. Right, I would shut that down. Like, well, you can do it if you want, but you know, you can't really pressure people and say, oh, everybody should do it, has to do it. The same way that you can't say, oh, nobody should do it and it's so bad and this and that. So, you know, it's more of a neutral perspective that people have to decide for themselves, which this sort of perspective shuts down most arguments, actually, in the sense that, like, if you just say, well, you might have a preference, but you can't state your subjective preference as though it's reality. And the reason why you can't do that is because that's what most discussion and everything is that you'll state something that's an opinion or a preference, even if a large number of people or just yourself, and you'll state it as though it's true, objectively true, etc., rather than just your opinion and your preference. So it's like, you might not like OnlyFans, you might not want to do it yourself, or you wouldn't use it on the other side, whatever, but you still have the ability to recognize it. Like, it's one thing to just say, okay, you're not doing it, but it's another thing to actively, outwardly insist and say, oh, somebody else is doing it, so I'm going to somehow take issue with that, and I'm going to take issue with that, and I'm going to prevent them from doing it. That's kind of a heavy-handed thing to do. I mean, a simple argument somebody would make is just like, okay, if they're making more than they make from their job, or potentially a lot more, right, it's hard to convince somebody not to do that. Right, they could just say, okay, then give me the same amount of money I'm making from it, and then never mind that it's supply and demand, and that people are buying into it, and they're, you know, blame that just as much, or the fact that you have usually they're in my suggested here somewhere, but I can't find one now. It's just dumb because they keep making the same point over and over, or like insisting upon these antiquated sort of social notions. Like, it might be useful for society on a broad mass level to have a family system with this and that, but so what? Like, what if you don't want to have kids at all? That's your choice. Then they'll say, oh, well, you do want to have kids, and the only reason why you would say that you don't want to is because you're just not, you know, this is the false duality, emperor has no clothes, assuming intent kind of thing. Somebody couldn't just genuinely not want that. It must be, oh my goodness, it's, you're only saying that because you can't find somebody suitable to have kids with, or some other nonsense like that. Like, you just can't have a different preference outside of what society tells you want to do, right? Like, they have one form, and it's like Bolshevik rhetoric. You can't just have a different preference and just do your own thing. No, any difference from this structure is only in spite of it, or only like anti. You're only doing it to be a contrarian. It's like similar to maybe what you could have said in that objective argument too, like, oh, you're only saying it's not objective, like morality, just to be a contrarian, but you would still agree subjectively that it's wrong. So I don't get the distinction. Is like, you still agree, but that's not enough. They want you to pretend like some collective agreement is enough to make something actually true. Or yeah, I watched a couple of these. Contestants who refuse to leave after being told no. Like some of these talent show things. That one guy's really funny who looks like Clark Kent. I can't remember his name, but who are the real gold diggers? And yeah, that's always a term I reject too, because again, it's a two-way street. There's so many ways to solve it. If men consider women gold diggers, or whatever the nonsense that people say is, look at it on 3 levels. Number 1 is keep your finances separate. So if you're in a relationship, just from day one, make that a rule that, okay, we're together because of emotional reason, social reason, whatever, sexual reason. We're not, it doesn't have to be economic reason. So we'll keep our finances separate and everything else is fine. So if they don't like it, then fine. Like that would be the standard. But on one hand, guys like using that as a means to woo women. And so it's like women have certain assets, like their physical attractiveness, supposedly, that people assume. And then men have supposedly money. This is the assumption. So both are trying to use each other to, sort of win the other over. And so the point is that there's sort of an exchange happening there. So it's your choice, right? You say, oh, a millionaire is with somebody and being sort of their sugar daddy, whatever. But it's their choice, right? So, like, I can't blame women for simply saying, well, we're attractive, and so men are willing to spoil us based on us being attractive, so that's it. Like, I can't blame you for just taking advantage of that. I can blame the men for offering it in the first place. Right, like, if you're saying, oh yeah, I'm a millionaire and I'd be willing, not that you would say it, but you know what I mean, I'd be willing to spoil and give a lot of money to somebody who's nowhere near as wealthy just because I find them attractive or whatever for sex and, extrapolation, relationship sense. That's your, you hold the power there. You might think, oh, because women, blah, 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 but it's not that simple, like. So you're opening the door. So on one hand, you can keep the finances separate. On the second hand, you can decide to keep the finances separate or try to date in your own wealth class so then it wouldn't be an issue. So if you're a millionaire, only date other millionaires. Or if you're whatever your class of wealth is, just date at the same level or up or whatever. And then the other side is just acknowledge what you're actually doing. So if you're wealthy and you're with somebody who's not wealthy, that's part of it. That's part of the incentive. Like, it's not, you shouldn't be surprised. Like, oh, you were only with me all those years for the money. It's like, obviously that would be a motivating factor if that's on the table. So again, I can't be too surprised by it. So it's similar to OnlyFans. Like, I'm not defending necessarily the act of doing that. Yeah, like a woman who just doesn't work and expects men to take care of her. That's not necessarily a great thing. But if men are doing that and providing the opportunity, right now it becomes a supply and demand issue that evidently there are men who like doing that, or evidently, and it doesn't always have to be like a millionaire sugar daddy type thing. It could just be somebody who makes $100,000 or $80,000 who's taking care of a girl who makes like $10,000 or doesn't work or whatever. There's always that incentive in relationships. Like, you're making minimum wage and then you date up to somebody who's making like $80,000. It's not like they're really rich, but that's an incentive in that relationship, obviously dynamic as well. And then you have the ability to So that's what people often don't get, is like there's always some sort of back and forth. And that was one of the worst moments too from one of those clips from this whatever podcast. It's like, oh, he gave you a bracelet. So it's basically like prostitution. I love that. I want to put that on like a t-shirt. Like, he gave you a ring, so it's basically prostitution. If a boyfriend gives their girlfriend jewelry, a necklace, a ring, buys them a gift, buys them flowers, that basically makes it prostitution, because nobody ever does that. nobody ever buys gifts for their significant other or anything like that. Like, it's so stupid. Even if you want to say in a micro sense, like, well, you barely know each other and they're spoiling you, and then you end up in bed. It's like, that's why prostitution is even hard to define that way, because it's like, oh, so if you buy somebody dinner and take them shopping and then you end up together that night and sleep together, did you pay them directly for sex, or did you just take them out on a nice night on the town and then have sex anyway? Like, how do you determine that? A husband buys their wife a gift and then sleeps with them. It's like, wow, what makes that different? It's a similar process. So all relationships by extension or prostitution is an expression that I always used to use, but I didn't realize how stupidly people would actually make a claim like that that's so lacking in sort of self-awareness. Okay, let's look at something here. A scene from an absolutist as they practice the stimuli acme, which would be, like, imagine them before, during, and after sex having the exact same facial expression. There's a scene you could make out of this, basically, like, you would show their face, just their face in a montage, basically, before, during, and after. It would have exactly the same expression, because it wouldn't be, it's hard to explain, like, you would, well, first of all, even the fact that it's sort of hard to explain, like, the fact that they'd be doing it all in just a way to remove the need, or even in a way that, basically, remove the need, get rid of it basically as a distraction, but then you also have the ability to consider that it's sort of a internalizing versus performative aspects. Like, a lot, you might think of this with the women, like, oh, they're faking it, but it's sort of the same idea. Like, pretend if you masturbate or something, what it comes down to is you're doing it to do it, but you're not vouching for the process in the same way. I guess with the stimuli acme application that we were previously looking at, it could be you're vouching for it if you reproduce through it, but there's something else to it that's sort of just poignant, though, because you're not reducing it to, it's just a very hard thing to explain. You're not letting it be a defining process. You're just doing it to do it, or you're treating it for what it is, sort of an animalistic situation. Sort of removing the need. I'm trying to see. I had a better way of explaining it before, I feel like. I don't really feel like reacting to anything right now either. I was going to do something like some of those stupid clips, the at whatever podcast or some shit like that, but now I don't even feel like it. So I'd gotten up to like episode 3, I think, in both The Promised Neverland and Dragon Ball. See, this is the problem. When I'm actually enjoying something, then I don't feel like doing it somehow. Or I don't want to go through it too fast or whatever. And the problem with that is then I lose track of the character points, because I had done like that recap with Monk. So these are all series that are not necessarily failed states, like to plot armor count or anything like that, the way that The Sopranos did. Right, we stopped watching that for actually a good reason. But some of these other ones are kind of a case where Monk is on hold at episode 7 we just watched. So we could go back and rewatch that and then watch episode 8. But, yeah, it didn't fail any condition. Also, it'll be impossible to remember all the counts, though, if I do that. But basically, yeah, that Dragon Ball we can still watch. The Promised Neverland we can still watch. So these are not really series that I stopped watching for any real reason. Right? It's just incidentally a case where you're only doing it because whatever. I don't feel like it. I like this sort of freedom to jump from category to category, though, like all these sort of random YouTube things, but I also don't mind watching something with a bit of focus. Like, I think that is the farthest we've gotten in a show, was Sopranos, and the reason why it was Sopranos is because we got to episode 13. Now, I'm sure I would get past that in Monk at least, because we're already at episode 7, and there's very unlikely that we would get 3 plot armor moments or 3 whatever failure state, not guessing something, or it's like 3 F grades. Those are sort of the failure states. I also feel like I've been handing out A grades too easily. In like, each of these, Promised Neverland got the 1, and I think sometimes a first episode sort of gets a benefit of doubt to a degree. They're like, oh, look, you're introducing the characters and everything, like, does it make me really want to watch the next episode? So, it's hard to make a first episode, because you got to introduce everything and tell a story internally of what's going on, specifically there. Is usually like a trigger moment in what could otherwise be seen as like a normal life that they have going on. Like the Promised Neverland, they've been at this orphanage for a long time, but now all of a sudden, they bring the doll to Connie, and now they discover the demons and all this stuff. Like, so it's not like, they suddenly, I don't know, it's just a normal life that's sort of disrupted, or a seemingly normal life. Like even Dragon Ball has one of the greatest trigger points ever, is that Goku is just chilling in the woods, living his life, never really interacted with another person, which is kind of weird. They sort of say, it's in some enchanted land, part of the land that's sort of untouched, and nobody really goes there. Maybe because they hear these stories of this monstrous kid who can chop down trees with his bare hands and can, grab a huge fish 10 times the size of his body right out of the water. Like, I like to almost portray that as a horror movie or a horror story trope. Like, they keep hearing all these things about him. Rumors like, this kid can do all this, and we stay away from there. Because he's such a monstrous power, who knows what he might do to us. He'll lift up your car and throw it and shit. But no, the trigger point there is obviously Bulma's existence and coming into contact with him. That leads to literally everything. So it makes you think, like, if Bulma never came across him, sure, he might have explored or done something eventually, but he was kind of content out there. It sort of shows you the simplicity of Goku's innocence. Like, he doesn't care. He's just happy he could just live there forever and just chill and take care of himself and eat the fish, and he's happy doing that. Well, we know he's always happy eating, but, like, he's always just seems like a simple guy. Right, whereas Vegeta, he'd want to take over the world, and, if he hadn't lost his memory. I like that first episode, or I guess it's the second episode, of Dragon Ball Z so much, because it's like the ultimate retcon, just none of that was probably suggested in there, in Dragon Ball. Right, the way they're showing it is just like, okay, his grandpa's dead, and, and his grandpa's dead, and that's it, and he's just unnaturally strong. But like, oh no, we never told you that you arrived, and how does Roshi even know all that? His grandpa's already dead, and you run into Roshi later, so I guess they just knew each other, right? Like, we're gonna take the turtle made it to the water, whatever that song is that I was referencing there, but it's so stupid, like, I don't know. The point is that, you came in a space pod, you're an alien, like, what happened to that space pod? Let Bulma check it out, like, nobody ever came upon that again, like, Goku didn't find it by chance. What did Grandpa Gohan do with it? Right, nobody, nobody noticed that ever. I guess nobody goes out to that area. It's very conveniently secluded, right? Some other people, humans and stuff. So I guess, Hermit was hermit. Gohan was a hermit. I think that's maybe even what he's called. I think I played as him too. He has that little weird mask in some DBZ fighting game. That's why I almost wouldn't want to play like Sparking Zero or something if I was going to, because it would spoil so many things about. I guess I would have to see Super first. It spoils maybe so many things about either Dragon Ball or, in this case, Super. So I haven't seen the very first series and the very last series, and I'm sure we'll get more. I mean, I guess even Daima counts as that, but was that like one of those, oh, now that Toriyama's dead, we can finally make this shitty fucking Daima story that he otherwise wouldn't have approved of? Or maybe that was his dying wish, please make this shitty one, where it's like GT, but everybody becomes a kid instead of just Goku. Or even, even just, like one of those public domain moments, like where as soon as Winnie the Pooh's rights run out, they make Winnie the Pooh slasher movie or some other shit like that. That's almost what it feels like. But maybe it seemed like it was maybe in planning and development earlier. I feel like if I made a story like one of these, I would always be like I understand the temptation, but I would sort of try to be very pure with it. Like, I'd be known as probably somebody who's a bit annoying, like, oh, we have to run by every decision by this guy or whatever, but, I wouldn't mind it being turned into a game or a movie or a show, but I would want it to stay really true, and so it'd have to be really successful for me to have that kind of clout to, see, early on, you let that happen too much, where, oh, you'll just agree because you don't have that kind of thing, but reputation, so you'll just kind of go along with it just to establish yourself. But at the same time, like, people say that with J.K. Rowling, but she was doing just fine. Like, she would have been a millionaire from the books alone, even without, if no movies were ever made, right? She was doing just fine. There's a reason why they were so eager to turn it into a movie, so you can't really say it, oh, the movies made Rowling. It's like, well, without her books, you wouldn't even have the movies at all. So whatever net positive effect it had on the books and whatever she got from that, obviously is, it's obviously a case where you get to realize it's still secondary, like it's obviously all her. Yeah, let's look at a concept here, like, oh, every day you should do something different, like eat something different, try something different, go to a different place, do a different activity. Just do something different rather than getting bogged down in this routine. And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money, right? All it costs you is time. So instead of, watching a show, or at least watch a different show every day, try a different episode, or, instead of watching a show, try some different game or a little sport, something like this. So what happens is people let sort of the structure define their behavior rather than some inherent preference. Like, if you could do anything, what would you do? And it doesn't have to be money intensive, but people just don't give themselves that chance. Like, every day write a page of a book. I was actually even trying that the other day. I have like this Kindle Scribe, so I was writing out like this thing that I wrote when I was younger. Because that's the thing, like, you might have the ability to do something, but you have to actually try. That's always what you see with people. Like, so many people will be like, oh, I'm not, like, they'll say they're not good enough before they even really attempt to do it. But even if somebody who is good enough, it would take them years and a lot of effort. You can't just dismiss it and say, that's like a reduction to structure element as well. Like, you'll just kind of go along with whatever's in front of you. And the problem is that if you go along with whatever's in front of you, it's like you get bogged down into some sort of routine that you feel like you have to do, right? Like, oh, your friends happen to go to the same school, happen to go work at the same place, you'll stay at the same job for a long time, you'll sort of live at the same place, stay at the same house, you'll, like the freedom of just not being attached to all these things that you think you want, but you really don't need. Like, people are a lot more minimalistic, or at least capable of minimalism in a way that they don't give themselves credit for. Like, you could live in like a little, one room tiny thing if you really wanted to, and you might not even care, you might not even mind, or you spend a lot of time just traveling and stuff. And what people would always assume is, oh, money, something money, but it doesn't have to be like that, where, you know, you're tied down and enslaved by money, and you assume that that's what you want, like, oh, let's buy a house, and I don't know, people assume too much, like, they take for granted what they're trying to do in their life from an intention standpoint, right? They let society kind of assume that for them, right? Forget about ability or like how good you are at something or whatever. You think about your intent, like what is it that you really want, and you sort of either you don't think about it at all, which is kind of staggering, right? This is what you sort of see. People will spend a long time with somebody in a relationship, and it's like you don't even know why. Like, oh, they said some cute little pickup line, and they bought me a drink, and then we had, you know, a fling. Like, if you put a little bit of thought into your own intention and what you actually want, but there's like this glorification of that, like, oh, you can't overthink it, don't be a stick in the mud, and then you end up in a relationship, and then a year later, you're like, oh, how did we end up here? This is terrible. Maybe if you put a little thought, you had your whole life to think things over. What good is a few minutes going to do you now? Like, if you thought about it ahead of time or before, or proactive, or defined for yourself what it is that you really want, right, you might have prevented that or been at least more clear with your intention, instead of, you know, that's how people fall in line with a sort of reduction to structure, that like you just assume it, right? You assume whatever's in front of you, like, okay, fine, we'll try to get married, have a white picket fence, this kind of thing that you just take for granted, that's what everybody wants, and you don't realize this societal structure, the incentive there, like a one-size-fits-all fallacy. You don't realize that, I don't know, it's a very stagnant sort of mindset. So oftentimes people just want something different just for the sake of it, right? That's what the Truman Show, what I've considered like my favorite movie of all time, maybe the best movie ever made. It's really a story, not so much a satire of reality TV and all of that, although it certainly is, and, you know, a critique of media, etc. It can work and play on that level, sure, right? But it's also more so a midlife crisis story, that before Truman even knows, right, for sure that anything's wrong in terms of the TV, he wants to go to Fiji. Now, he doesn't want to go to Fiji to test the bounds of Sea Haven, etc. No, he's having a similar experience to what people have in real life, where they live in the same small town their whole life because they can't afford anything else, or they're just used to it. That's where their family is, right? That's where they grew up, and they just want to break away and just go somewhere else, just to try it, just to enjoy it, right? So what it shows you is that, right, he's not doing that because, oh, of the show. He doesn't know that, right, even before all that, he's just having like this quest of the human spirit. Like, I just want to experience things because I've been here my whole life. So it's the same thing in your life. Like, there's all these restrictions, all these things you assume that you want or that you have to do, or that you don't even think about, and you just defer to blindly and mindlessly at every point, right? So you have much more power than you realize. And that's also the power of minimalism. Like, you don't need a lot of what you have. I don't care, third world country, first world country, or whatever. You don't need a lot of it, because you can just, well, it applies more. Like, you could live a more minimalistic lifestyle. The problem is what happens is everything gets sort of upscaled. So, like, there's an expression. You want to be making money in a first world country, a rich country, and then live in a third world country, because your money goes farther there. Like, you know, you could live like a king there compared to anything else. So, because you're always going to be earning a relatively low amount. To, you know, if you live in a first world country, even if you make an okay amount of money, it's not going to go very far, because the expectation is of that amount of money, right? So you have to spend more. Like, you live in California or New York City. Wow, you're making more money than you would in other parts of the country, but you also have to pay a lot more to survive, to live, apartment, whatever. So now, the same goes for a third world country. Like, you know, you make less money, but you also, relatively that's the expectation, so you're also going to have, that less amount of money is going to have to go farther, obviously, because everything can't be as expensive as what you'd see in a first world country, because they can't be expecting that you'd be making that amount of money. So it scales down. So you can take advantage. Okay, you make money in a first world country, then you go to a third world country, and you try to live there, and you'll live a lot better potentially, even with some of the flaws and limits. There's a whole irony, too, of a machination process that people don't understand, is the simple fact that you're able to... They'll condemn certain things like, oh, look how hardworking this third world country is compared to the first world, but they're working that hard to get to that point anyway. So once they work really hard, like other countries did in the past, now they'll catch up technologically, and then they'll become lazy too, or whatever, rely on it more. So it's not really an ability or will or anything. It's just, you're reacting to the technology available, and if you do that, then you're letting that define you, and so you're working so hard to get to the point of where these other countries already are, and then you'll be like them too, more and more over time. So it's not really about you or them, right? It's just more about the circumstance that you're in. If you had that option, right, anybody else would want to do it too. So, okay, so today I'll do another random YouTube session because I don't really know what to watch, and it's a situation where one thing that triggers me is when it's like I hear something that's being discussed and it's like a take that I've already addressed, assuming that everybody should know who I am and heard what I said. But like, I've already addressed this. How could people possibly be saying it? Because nobody knows who I am, or nobody, whatever. But people have this like closed structure confirmation bias perspective a lot of the time. Like, they only want to hear what they want to hear, so it doesn't matter. You cannot dissuade with reason what came about by desire. But here's a good clip, and then I've been watching a lot of these Charlie Kirk ones or whoever that are, he's not stupid, but he's also kind of narrow on certain subjects. And I also like the false duality framing that would come with it. That like, if you disagree with him, then that means you're a liberal or Democrat or something like that. It's, my whole reputation for objectivity would tell you that you're in a position where it puts you in a position where like you would be objective and simply shoot down a flawed claim that someone else is making. You're not necessarily making a claim yourself, which might seem like, well, that's just a neutral position that, this or that. But rather, let the people who are making outward positions, outward claims, make their case, and then find the flaws in that. So you're not necessarily asserting a position or a claim yourself, right? And that's fine, right? So all you're doing is addressing what they're saying. You're not saying, my alternative is such and such. That could be the next step, but first let's shoot down a bad claim, a flawed, inconsistent claim that's not actually valid, and then we can both discuss, or everybody can try to come up with something else, but don't use, it's the same thing with religion. People prefer the false certainty, you have all these certainties and all these answers, versus, just the unknown. So I guess, we don't like the feeling of the unknown, so we're going to insist upon this. And so the point is that you insist upon false certainty over uncertainty, but that doesn't make the argument saying so what's your answer then if God doesn't exist? Assuming that you have one, assuming that people would know what that is or have all the answers, and even if you did, you'd be deferring to science mostly, so, you're kind of personalizing, it's not about that. You might not know, but that doesn't mean that because you don't know, or you don't have all the details at least, that doesn't mean that that anything anybody else says then is just right. So you don't know, and then, or humanity collectively doesn't know, but that means, whatever you say random, that means Christianity is right, that means Scientology is right, that means Hinduism is right, that means everything is right, because you don't know, so anything you say is more credible than that. But of course that's not how it works, because again, the burden is on the claim maker. So when you say you simply don't know, you're not claiming something. You're not saying, oh, a magical fairy came down and created the universe. You're not saying anything. But the people who are claiming certainty. So that's the unwillingness to be puzzled fallacy, where you say people will accept something with false certainty rather than uncertainty. So throughout human history, people will come up with that. Let's look at a thing here, and then I'll go off that. This is one that's a really stupid claim. It's, you are the illegal immigrant. So this is going to be Mexicans' hardest workers. So this is a case where let me hear what he says. We will finally evict all of the illegal aliens that are coming here, stealing jobs from Americans. If you break into my house, I just accept it? Because you washed my dishes and made my beds. Go back and come back in the right way. Is that what the Indians should have told white Americans? But the whole thing is, they did eventually try to fight back. Yes, Thanksgiving comes from some of their hospitality, and yes, they were partly welcoming at times, but let's hear the whole thing. It's a deport all white folks back, but you're not understanding the reality of how history is written in blood. Again, something I said. It's not that the Indians let them in, and oh my goodness, they didn't exactly have a choice. The Europeans had the superior military technology, everything. So yes, they at times were hospitable with the Europeans to a degree, yes, but it wasn't exactly up to them. If you have a military force and you come in and you conquer the land and kill everybody, right, that's different. So you say, like, today, yeah, if the immigrants came in with an organized government and military and took over the United States and killed everybody who opposed them and took over the country, then yeah, sure, we can't say no to that. So it's more akin to that, like they had the force on their side. Deport all white folks back if you have the infrastructure to do it. Their mistake. Learn something from their compassion, but they were so compassionate that they had tribal warfare, so much so that they fought amongst themselves for so long, where they didn't have a proper organized government, right, to actually stake claim of the land that was there, that was supposedly there. So this is the historical context, right? You're leaving yourself like a sitting duck in a historical context because you're not very technologically advanced, so the Europeans had that advantage. You're not very organized as a government, so you don't have that advantage. So when you're just these scattered tribes that are fighting amongst themselves, now when an invader comes along, if it hadn't been the Europeans, it could have just been somebody else. So you're missing the whole point. It's not a moral argument like you're taking a position like, oh, are you defending that? Right? We could condemn it, but then we don't want to leave the country. So you could do that same thing with any country in the world that has been conquered at some point, right? Genghis Khan situation with respect to his what he ravaged. So anywhere in the world has been conquered at some point. So of course you could trace it back and find, a sort of victim group that was there first, and then they were conquered, and then somebody else conquered them, the conquerors, and then so on and so forth. So that's how history is written. It's not to justify it, it's just to understand it's sort of a pointless argument because, again, history is written in blood. That's always what happens. That's always how it goes. And so you could find that anywhere. Like, go to every country in the world and trace it back a couple hundred years or more. And if you trace it back a couple hundred years, you will find that, yeah, there was some conqueror who came in and killed them and took their land. And that's just how history works. So it's defined by ability and, resources, technology, military. It's defined by that. So I have this expression like, if I could go back in time and tell the Native Americans one thing, it wouldn't be the big bad evil Europeans are coming and don't trust them. Don't be so compassionate with them, as if that would have made a difference, right? Instead, I would teach them how to make gunpowder more effectively, or in an advanced way, or give them some sort of weaponry advice that would give them a better fighting chance, because it doesn't come down to morality, like, oh, the Europeans are bad, evil, whatever. But that doesn't matter, because you have that doesn't matter because you have the ability to, realize that that's how history works. If it wasn't the Europeans, right, and the scattered tribes were still there, some other country, empire would have come along eventually and taken them over too, possibly, or, done something, colonized them. So, again, you might think, it's victim blaming, but it would always be that in history because it's like, what could have stopped that from happening? Could the Europeans have just been nice and not done that? Possibly. And we like to pretend today, that we're all above that, but we're kind of beholden to the current technology and structure that we have in place, right? History was done, and that doesn't mean that, they were justified in doing it. It just means that was commonplace in history. Now, with the equalizing factor of nuclear weapons or other things, we want to act all morally superior, but you're sort of defined by the time that you come from, and one of the things about that is, if you're scattered tribes and you don't have an organized government and you have inferior technology, you're very likely to get invaded. So that's the way that you protect it. Not by saying, look, the Europeans are evil, that doesn't solve anything. You would instead say that we got to have better technology, we got to have better technology, or you got to have better better technology, better infrastructure, organized government. So that is the factual reason, right? It's not taking a side like, that's horrible that you're just observing what actually happened and how history was actually written. So, written in reality, I'm saying. Like, when one nation, invader, whatever, has greater technology than the people being invaded, that's what happens. And also, in conjunction with that, you have the ability to consider, learn something from their compassion. Give other people opportunity. Letting in the white man. Now, to be fair, again, they let them in to a degree, right? They were hospitable at times, but also that's kind of sporadic because it's not like collectively they made that decision because they're all scattered tribes. So even in that sense, it's not really accurate. But whatever, they were shown some amount of hospitality. But frankly, whether that happened or not, if they tried to fight you from the beginning, what would have happened? The Europeans from the beginning, well, Europeans had superior technology, sure. There were less of them there, so they could have killed Columbus and everybody and sent a signal, right? But then all that would have meant is that they would have come back with force. So clearly, Europeans had the advantage, technologically. So again, it comes down to technology, the force, the organization. So again, don't mistake it like, it's compassion. Even without the compassion, the Europeans had superior technology, right? They could have invaded them. They would have done it with force. So even without that, even without the actual subject matter here, so that's a fallacy. Again, you're misunderstanding the point. It's not about, compassion. It's about an invasion situation, so it's a little bit different. And that's actually quite strange then to compare illegal immigration to an invasion and genocide that way. So in other words, that's a terrible thing and it should be stopped. But that's the difference. It's like if you have the means and technology and infrastructure to invade another country, that would be the criteria there. It's a little bit different than saying that, compassion and letting them in and stuff, right? You didn't exactly have much of a choice when their technology is so superior and, you're kind of sitting ducks without an organized government. That's a really bad argument. The conclusion is just realize the way it actually works is in terms of technology and resources. So the way to really protect yourself is not to rely on the goodness of other people that way, but rather to rely on your technology and, again, infrastructure. If you had an organized government and you were all systematic, and within an hour you had all your cavalry come to this shore to greet them, they might be afraid. And if you had better weapons and resources, they would have maybe just taxed you instead of killing you. And, they, what they did to other countries too, like India. You might say, India was colonized and this and that. But you see the layers of it. if it was like a race thing or something, right, that there's a reason for that. Like, they're not going to just kill you all if you have a better infrastructure and technology and different things, right? They'll adapt the colonization to it. So it has more to do with, oh, well, you have better technology, better infrastructure, so we don't really want to have a full-scale war with you and try to take you over. We'd rather colonize you with the threat of it, and you will comply to a degree, and then, that's the point, is that you'll have different reactions based on the technology, so it's less of a moral thing. I love that sort of conclusion. The reason why the Europeans attacked the Native Americans is because they're just bad people. That's why. So if they were good people, they wouldn't have done it. And nobody else in history ever invaded anybody, and everything was fine. Or again, like even Genghis Khan was so successful because he's such a ruthless, evil guy. Well, there were plenty of other ruthless people out there, kings and leaders, but they weren't as good at doing what he did. So it comes down to ability, it comes down to technology. That's just the reality of how the world works, right? Then morality and stuff like that comes second. Morality is the plaything of conquerors, as one of my quotes. Like, it's nice to squabble over it now, but it didn't matter then at all. It just mattered who had superior technology, and that's how people went about it. And the other point there is, okay, this is kind of dumb. A lot of these are just stupid takes. Again, I'm not necessarily making an argument as much as I'm just shutting down bad arguments. And the best thing to do that with is religion, because you don't need to make an argument in response, even hypothetically. There doesn't need to be an alternative. You can just have, general moral code and general. So you'll say, oh, where do morals come from then? They come from the same place they do when there's a God. Like, they come from people, and they're enforced and upheld by people. Whether you believe in a God or not, it comes down to human level enforcement of it. So now, let me see what some of these I watch were, or I don't care. This is why Charlie Kirk is. Again, I don't even dislike him. In fact, originally I kind of liked him, but he's made a lot of stupid arguments in these clips that I guess I had never seen. They're so heavy-handed, and they're myopic, and even you have the crowd cheering him on, so you kind of have the advantage of that aspect. Argue about reparations. Should black people get reparations? Let me sort of make my argument first before I hear what he says. So it's kind of like, okay, reparations for black people. Now, again, here's the one privilege argument that you can actually make, is that, well, of course, generations of white people would have advantages over generations of black people, because or even Native Americans, because of the circumstance. Obviously, because the invader class, you could say this with any country, right? The invaders who conquer the country are always going to have an advantage, generationally, wealth-wise, etc., over the people who were conquered or killed or, enslaved that way. So you're going to have an advantage that way. The question is, what should we do about it now? My whole point is, as long as everything is equal now, not so much, again, equal in outcome or anything like that, but as long as you're not discriminating now or mistreating them now, yes, they might have had that disadvantage from the past. And again, that's true in all countries, everything that's been conquered. Irish need not apply, right? It always comes from a position of power more so than just simply race, right? Think about it that way. Like, if the Europeans didn't have the technology they had, however they felt about Africans or Native Americans, it wouldn't have mattered. Oh, they're, white man's burden and this and that. They certainly used race as a way to try to rationalize it. So I'm not going to say that, the race didn't play a factor and it was just purely power and technology, but no matter how they felt, it wouldn't have mattered. Like, oh, we can't deal with these, African kings who have established military and infrastructure, and we can't deal with that. And in fact, they didn't necessarily deal with, they were less, think about the irony of that too. You talk about, Europeans are evil and they're, enslaving black people. And again, there was already established slave trade there and things like that. But the point is, why didn't they just conquer all of Africa then? Which at various points, they conquered parts of it, but I'm just saying, why not just conquer Africa? Why even go to the Americas? Could it be that because even then, Africa had better infrastructure than the Americas, where the Americas really were like the sitting duck in history? When you look at the population of the Native Americans and how sporadic and spread out it was and how it was based in tribes, it really was one of the weakest situations where, again, I swear, if it wasn't the Europeans, somebody else would have come, another empire. They were really a sitting duck with all these resources that they're sitting on. I can appreciate their minimalistic lifestyle, but all I'm saying is if you don't have an organized government and you don't have a military and good technology, that's exactly what can happen to you. So you're leaving yourselves at the mercy of morality, which you should never do. Never assume the goodness of people and rely on that, because even amongst yourselves, you're fighting in tribal warfare. So that clearly shows you, like, oh, it wasn't like some peaceful utopian paradise. So you might think it's a lot of victim blaming, but it's really not. It's just, let's just look at the reality, right? How could we really have stopped that from happening? And the only way is, again, their technology would have to be better. They'd have to have more of an infrastructure. That's really the only way to do it. But no, so I would point out the privilege aspect. It's not entirely untrue, right? Obviously, you have the invader privilege. The fact that, okay, your ancestors might have conquered the country, so you might have certain wealth and associations to that. Although, to be fair, a lot of those people are poor too. And just because, you might have been a poor peasant family, but that's still, you're better off than a slave family. You're still better off than a, Native American family. So you can look at it that way, but ultimately, as long as you're not doing anything discriminatory now, right, history is what it is, and you just kind of have to accept the fact that, okay, it's not happening now. We got rid of everything that would have been discriminatory, or if you think there are still overtly discriminatory policies in place, then we can address those, but name the system. You say it's systemic, and then people also say, this is one of the biggest contradictions ever, like, it's systematic racism, but then also, but it's subliminal, and it's implicit, and it's like implicit bias, and it's, certain microaggressions and stuff. All of those things would point to that it's not in a system. Like, what does systematic racism look like? Oh, it looks like segregation. It looks like slavery. That's what it looks like. So, I mean, and again, obviously those things have been long gone, but so calling it systemic, I forget what people say, systemic or systematic, but either way, that's not fair to say. But if you do find a policy that you take issue with, fine. If you do think people are at a certain disadvantage, fine. The only thing I'd argue with that, though, too, is like, that's the open door policy of the U.S. over time, is like, oh yeah, people have come in so freely for so long, right, as immigrants. Now you have to decide, if it is bad here, you're welcome to go anywhere else. And I hate when this is construed as like, oh, go back to Mexico or whatever. Somebody says at a school meeting and like, oh, that's racist. Forget about that. Like, first of all, that's a country issue. So somebody who's Japanese lived in Mexico for 10 years and then they came to the United States and then they're constantly complaining about it. You say, why don't you go back to Mexico, even though they're Japanese? Because you're not talking about the race. You're talking about, well, if you don't like it here, why don't you go back to where you were just living beforehand? So you see how it's not really about race, but whatever. But even in a broader sense, it's like, forget about where you came from. If you don't like it in a particular place, you can go to any other country on the planet, and many of them might be better in certain ways, especially ones with low populations, certain European countries. So what you realize with that is, you realize that, there's other options. So this notion of like an obligation or you're trying to prove something is a little odd. Like, there's a reason why people live here. Doesn't mean it's perfect. We can pick on and criticize certain aspects, but it is a little bit stupid when you try to make it so heavy-handed. And here's one little topic, and I'll watch through some of these, but like lowest common denominator, social contrivance, it's like, it's easy for people who are initial-minded, one layer, right, human function to reduce themselves to the social contrivance of the lowest common denominator versus people who are maybe more objective thinkers, etc., or who at least choose to do that actively. That's a lot harder to reduce that, or you wouldn't see the point, and it would be like, it's just a lower standard, lower measure. So that's the problem is, you're looking at it like a positive because, oh, look, everything is on the social contrivance initial basis, but that's actually lower than it would be any other way. So it's a lower measure that's being glorified just for mass kind of consideration. And then, okay, let's see what he actually says. Any ability to make better decisions, to save money. Jews had an extermination, and then they end up. So yeah, you can recover from it. So again, that still doesn't necessarily make the point, though, because you could easily say, well, regardless of the fact that you can overcome a bad situation like that, right? I'll play devil's advocate a little bit, even though I don't really believe in reparations. It's like, although for Native Americans, maybe there could be something considered, but it's a case where, you know, I could play devil's advocate here and say, just because you can overcome great adversity doesn't mean you shouldn't be entitled to something for it. Like, yes, Asian people overcame a lot of things. You know, Jews, he's saying Jewish people overcame a lot, right, after the Holocaust and still are, you know, very wealthy now, etc. That doesn't mean that makes it okay, or that doesn't mean that it means, so because you can overcome that and become successful, doesn't mean that you should have to go through it, or doesn't mean that you should have to not be given some, you know, kind of compensation for it. Like, and arguably at times they might have been. I don't know, like, what were the policies? Maybe there was something given back to Jewish people after the Holocaust, right? This is actually probably the fallacy. There probably were reparations in Germany given to them because of how extreme that circumstance was. I'm actually not aware of this. I think I've heard some programs at least, but, you know, you very likely should get some sort of special treatment after that because of how extreme what you just went through was. There might have been certain programs and different things that helped them, but the point is that, and they were already wealthy to some extent before that, so you could say it that way. But that's the point, is that you have, just because you can overcome something and recover from it, doesn't mean that you couldn't necessarily still be entitled to some sort of reparation. Like, oh yeah, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps after segregation and slavery and overcome that, which, again, many people did overcome that, but maybe you would be owed something anyway, despite the fact that you can overcome it, right? This is sort of like, you know, somebody who was slandered and abused and something like this got out of that situation and went on to become very happy and successful. But that doesn't mean that they can't still be paid damages, like, oh, but then don't sue them, don't give them, you know, kind of a compensation for what they went through, because they overcome it so well. Like, right, like, pretend I get slandered by somebody, and then I go on to become a millionaire of my own merits while the lawsuit is going on, totally unrelated, and then they're like, well, look, this guy became a millionaire, he's doing well for himself, but I was still slandered, and I still deserve some compensation for it. So you can see how that works. Don't use the fact that people became successful to shoot that down. Again, I'm not necessarily in favor of it anyway. I'm not in favor of reparations, but that's kind of a bad argument because you can easily shut that down. I would just say a more elitist perspective, like, it is what it is. As long as it's not happening to you now, that's the best you can hope for. Like, don't discriminate now. Don't do anything bad now, like, against people, and then deal with the rest. Like, the fact that the history is written in blood, etc. This one is Neil Tyson, who's, like, arguing for, he's getting shushed by some woman there in the middle. Let's hear what he says. She silenced him, but he owned her. No problem with colonizing Mars. It's not really colonizing if nobody's there. This crops up in a different way. There's a mission, there's a telescope. Large Synoptic Survey Telescope. It's not going into orbit. She's being very rude, though, shushing him. I'm guessing Lawrence, maybe I'm wrong. I'm just guessing. Whatever it takes to terraform Mars and move 1 billion people there, you're kind of assuming that. One planet does not go extinct from an asteroid or something else. And the point of it, more effort to do that than to deflect an asteroid. But number one, an asteroid is a bad example because that likely, if an asteroid destroyed the Earth or made it uninhabitable, the impact of that could very likely affect maybe other planets around it, right? Like if an asteroid makes the Earth just blow up, which is unlikely, but I'm saying that would affect Mars, wouldn't it? Like a lot, even temperature change, other things could affect you in some extreme way if it's that big of a change. But the point is that, okay, moving aside an asteroid, here would be my argument. Again, he doesn't like terraforming as an idea. In other clips, he says, like, well, whatever you can do to terraform Mars, why can't you do that to the Earth? But here would be the good argument for it. I sometimes am stuttering here just because I have to talk so loudly, or at least I feel like I have to talk loudly. So sometimes I'm not sure if you hear the first word, so I have to kind of overdo it. But okay, here would be my argument for terraforming is that the Earth is still in good shape relatively. I know we kind of have hysterical climate people and stuff, but the Earth still is in good shape. Now, there are going to be certain finite resources that do run out, right, and certain issues that we have that no matter how much we think our technology is good, the planet is what it is, right? So if you start fresh on Mars, there could be certain advantages that poses. You're starting fresh. Maybe the way that you terraform it would be too difficult to do on Earth with so many people here, whereas there you have a free playground to work with, right? It's a more open, uninhibited environment. That's number one. Number two is that you might think you can reverse some negative changes on Earth, and you might very well be able to do that, but like, why wait would be my question. Like, why can't you do both at once? You can be in the very long and arduous process of terraforming Mars while we also are trying to protect the Earth. But the difference is Mars will be ready by the time Earth is in a defunct state, and then we can still work on, reversing that. But the way he's saying it is like, let's try to fix the Earth once it goes bad. But by the time it goes bad, right, you could have had Mars ready too. There's no finite, I know they're big projects, but that would be the point. You would have it in your back pocket in reserve in case the Earth can't be salvaged, or in case, you want that alternate option, or in case of other things. So that's the point. You say, like, wait till the Earth is in really bad shape and then try to bring it back from there. But by the time we wait till that point, because again, it's still in relatively good shape, by the time we wait till it gets to that point, we could have already terraformed Mars. So we're having that as a bonus in our back pocket, right? You're preparing ahead of time in the spare time that you have now. Once the Earth starts going bad, then you can obviously try to reverse that as well. You could say you could try to do it even now, but Earth is in such a shape that, like, there's only so much you can do, right? Even if you got it fully renewable or this or that, there might be certain phenomena that you just can't deal with, you just can't stop. So there's nothing wrong with having that as another option. Not saying it should be the biggest priority, but you could do both at once. Try to fix the Earth, try to stop any decay, also but that's the point. Like, don't wait till it fully decays until you do it. The asteroid argument is a whole nother thing, but again, the same thing. Like, it doesn't mean don't stop the asteroids from hitting Earth. Try to do that too. But if you can't, then you have Mars in your back pocket, or you would have both. So what's the problem with that? Like, there's nothing wrong with don't have all your eggs in one basket. What if something happens that we really can't prevent? Then Mars could have been the only salvation that we had, or some other planet potentially. I don't see the argument against it. I'm not like a huge fan of it, but in the long term, it could be the difference between human beings living forever. If we go from planet to planet to planet, eventually we set up a system with hundreds of planets, we would never go extinct, because even if one of them blows up, we always have another, we always have a system. So that's the real point. It's a kind of case example. If you set up a system by which you can terraform one planet, then you feel confident that you can terraform any planet or every planet. Not that you really can, but eventually, all it takes is that first one, right? Right now, we have all our eggs in one basket. If the Earth goes, we're done. Human beings are done. That's it. It's over. But if we have Mars, then okay, we have a second chance. Then eventually we'll have something else and something else. So it's a big thing to show a proof of concept that you really can do it. And so, again, the argument there is he's saying, like, it would be easier to deflect asteroids. It would be easier to probably reverse whatever negative state of Earth is happening, that it's going to become uninhabitable. But I would look at it as a net positive. Earth could be perfectly fine. Maybe the Earth will go on forever. But what's the harm in having a second option, a second planet? You know, you get extra resources, you get certain benefits, you get, spread out the population, whatever. There's so many positives of it. There's no negative of it, unless you think we're wasting our time and effort and resources. But again, I'm not saying make it the number one priority, but it can be a goal nonetheless. And then also you have this ability to consider, like, what if there's something we can't prevent, or maybe it's too early to worry about trying to protect the Earth because it's already in good shape. So we're not doing it. He thinks we're doing it directly, like, oh, the Earth is going to just shut down tomorrow, and that's why we're trying to terraform Mars. So why don't we try to save the Earth? The Earth is going to be fine for a very long time still, right? Maybe not our present way of life, but technology and resources, but the Earth is going to be around for a long time. And so it's fine. We can try to reverse certain things. We can try to make it as perfect as possible, but rather than just wait for, like, oh, now the Earth is starting to decay and get in really bad shape, now we have to come up with something and reverse it, assuming that we can do that, assuming it would be sort of the same process as terraforming another planet. It's a case where it's a case where you wouldn't really be able to do that. In case you can't do it, or in case, you can have them both going at the same time. I think that's a fair argument. We believe Trump is anti-American. Okay, I don't care about this one. Are you voting for Kamala? I think they're just booing him. Ben and Jerry's, Neil talking about that. I don't know, I feel like a lot of these don't even pertain to that. Bro is watching YouTube shorts all day. Some of the ones to do with religion are really irritating, though, because it's so obvious. That's why my only expression for that is, you cannot dissuade with reason what came about by desire, because they're two separate arguments. You hear a lot of it just from an emotional standpoint, or even if, let's quote some passage from the Bible, you're kind of just using itself to insist upon itself, like, well, the Bible says so, and then, you can't question that, or, that doesn't make it true. So there was one really bad argument where he said, like, somebody says, like, the Bible is made up. It could be written by people. It was written by people, right, human beings, and so it could have been mistranscribed. It could have been changed for ulterior motives. It could have been lost in translation, like a game of telephone. It could have been, there could have been flaws with it, biases creep in, ulterior motives, whatever, right? It could just be all made up. And then the guy fires back, that Cliff guy, I think it is, and he says, well, history could be all made up and all of this. But there's two reasons why that's a bad argument. Number one is, we don't worship history. We might idolize certain figures from it and stuff like that, and base our life around certain lessons of the past. But on the contrary, not only do we not worship history and base our whole life around it, we say the opposite. We say, like, learn from history so you don't make the same mistakes again. So you're almost looking at history in a negative way, like, all of these bad things that have happened, right, atrocities by people, etc., all these mistakes, we're trying to learn from them and not do the same thing. Whereas so that's the difference. You say, well, history could all be made up. Well, it could be, and that would be fine, and you could still go on with your life and do what you got to do, right? That you're not worshiping it like, oh, I've got to pray to history every day or something like that. And again, on the contrary, you're even condemning it and saying, let's try to learn from it and not make the same mistakes that people did in history. Whereas with the Bible, right, with religion, you're kind of worshiping it and making a big spectacle out of it. So if the Bible is fake, then stop worshiping it. But if history is fake, it doesn't matter, because you don't have to worship it. You don't have to care about it, right? You can learn from it, but it doesn't have to be the same thing, right, as worship and glorification and basing your whole lifestyle around, and that's the difference. Is you're making one of them is a spectacle that you're making out of it. One of them is just, okay, so what if it's not true? Then just move on and do what you got to do. But the second point is the cui bono effect too. Who benefits, right? Who benefits from history being fake? Like the fact that human beings have killed one another and had wars and all this kind of stuff. Why does that really matter? So like human beings are violent people and they'll kill each other. Like that's what we learned from history. That doesn't really benefit anybody the way that religion would have a narrow scope and like, you know, very certain things that are being argued for in a very narrow scope, whereas history is much more broad. Not saying that everything in history is true, right? That's claimed in books and stuff, but that's all I'm saying. It's a bad argument because one of them you're saying to worship, one of them you're simply saying to acknowledge is true. That doesn't have the same resonance, like the same impact. So, I mean, I could spend all day debunking both of these clowns, like Charlie Kirk and Cliff, who again, I don't think Charlie Kirk is that stupid, but he said a lot of dumb things here. All these intelligent people who are religious, which you could argue for on like a functional level, like it's useful, it can give people peace of mind, but whatever. So we got, yeah, these are some of the things. I should just look through like my YouTube history as far as like what all I've been watching. I have to change my phone's position based on whether I'm watching shorts or whether I'm watching like an actual video. Some King of Queens clips. Some like this is hilarious to see. Like we can make an itinerary of what I'm watching at any given time, and I can keep reacting even to parts of it. So like random clips from the King of Queens for some reason I felt like watching. Lately I've watched on and off, and then I've been watching some like X Factor bad audition. Some of the funny ones where they're kind of like that. I like that Andrew guy who's like, you know, why are you here, Andrew, to audition for American Idol? Of course, should be pretty obvious, right? He pisses off Simon, and then some of what he does is pretty innocent. Like he says, I'm gonna sing House of the Rising Sun. You know that song? Like, why is that? He's getting mad at that. Like, he's just asking because there's just like dead silence. Sometimes if you just have like a neutral disposition, people take it as a negative, right? False, absolute, contrivance response, false, inherent. So undue positive emphasis is taken as a granted state. So what we need now is simple. That, so yeah, we could look at some of these clips. It kind of is giving me a headache though. Like I've said the same thing a million times. I don't know how much more clear I can be that everybody should innately just know this. At least consider it and then decide for yourself what to think of it, unlike religion, because I mean, the fact that they're willing to have the conversation about it, I can appreciate, but it just comes from a place of desire. Like, and again, this is one of the best arguments here that I always make is, forget about whether to be religious or not. Focus more on the specific religion. Like, okay, yours is right and everybody else's is wrong. Like, how can Hinduism be wrong, and Greek gods can be wrong, and every other one can be wrong, but Christianity could be right? Like, you're not seeing the pattern, right? The pattern of human behavior is, in their unwillingness to be puzzled and their ignorant state throughout history, you know, not having a lot of knowledge of science and all of this, I can't blame people for coming up with superstitions, right? It'd be scary. You're a caveman and you don't know how the world works, right? I'm not saying that I'd be any better in that situation, right? Human being would be, you'd hear a big bolt of thunder and, you know, you'd hear the sound of thunder and see a bolt of lightning. You don't know what the hell to make of that. You've never seen that before, right? You can't, it seems obvious to us, but like, oh, that could be some god from the heavens who's upset, so I better make sure not to do what I just did today or he'll strike me down with a bolt of lightning. You can understand how people might think like that because they don't know how any of this works, and so they have to come up with theories and superstitions and everything like that. So I honestly can't blame you for that, but that shows you the tendency. If you just observe history fully, you would have an answer to this. You would say, like, how come people came up with different spirituality and faith and religion in every part of the world? That must give it credibility, but it wouldn't give credibility to the specifics of it. It would give credibility to one of two things. That either, number one, this is like a devil's advocate argument that I would make, everyone's describing the same thing, just in different forms. So even Hinduism describes multiple gods, whereas Christianity describes one. But you'd say, oh, they take on different forms and they're just interpreting it differently because this divine being is so otherworldly that we can't put it into words. So some people might interpret it as a polytheistic faith. So even if you want to make that, fine. Every religion is describing the same thing, effectively. That would be the one argument you might make. But the second point is that not so much that every religion is like, how can yours be right and every other one be wrong in terms of the specifics of it? So it's the psychological aspect. What if the reason isn't that they're all describing the same thing, but that they're all reacting to their own ignorance and uncertainty about the world, which again isn't necessarily their fault. Throughout human history, it's easy to say, like, oh, of course we know how this works now, but you can understand the fear factor and the superstition of, like, wow, we don't know how anything works. We're just ignorant, people in the world, and there's so much to think about, so that we can't explain. So what that shows you is the simple fact that religion would be a psychological need or response to something to try to give you a sense of structure, some peace of mind, some answers to the unknown, right? They would give you some structure. They would give you all kinds of different answers. It would sort of satisfy your ego a little bit, right? To think the world revolves around you a little bit, or that you at least have the answers and you know how everything works, or how certain things work. So you're trying to look for answers where you otherwise can't find them, right? Because you don't have science and technology and all of this yet. So that's where it comes back to, is the simple fact that those are the two credible arguments you could actually make. But the premise is very hurtful to religions normally, because again, forget about saying that, oh, there is no God or anything like that. How can your God be right, or your religion be the correct one, and every other one is wrong throughout human history? Not just now, but throughout all of human history. We look at Greek gods like they're nothing more than mythology, like, oh, Zeus and this and that. We look at all these other gods like, oh, we know that's fiction, and we're going to make movies about it, and fantasy and stuff. But we treat that like fantasy, but we treat other things like reality. So why is that? So hard to do? Because you realize it's like the same process at work. So you're not seeing. Again, it would explain two things, right? How can your religion be right and everyone else's be wrong? And how can this supposed credibility be explained? Like, well, if religion is a lie, then how come everybody throughout human history, every area that weren't even in contact with each other, how could they all come up with similar stories of this godlike being or different spirituality, right? How could that be? So on one hand, it kills the credibility of a particular religion by saying, well, there's so many other ones, so how come yours could be right and theirs could be wrong? But it also would address the supposed credibility of, well, how could all these different cultures that aren't even in contact with each other come up with the same lie or the same idea, right? So again, it would be one of two things. Either it's a psychological need and desire that people have in the absence of knowledge, that they would come up with some false certainty, false absolute, egotism, etc., based on themselves and their immediate environment, sort of insisting upon themselves, the human ego, etc. That could be one explanation. It's a psychological need and desire and peace of mind. Or number two is that it could be that they're all describing the same thing, the same sort of God or spirituality or phenomenon, which I'm highly, I would definitely doubt that. But okay, they could all be describing effectively the same God, just in different ways that they interpret based on their. And I kind of like that as a fictional tool. Like, I would use that in like a story that I would write. It's like a cool idea. So you explain that, oh, they're all describing the same God, but they just see it in different ways because it's so that's what divinity is like. Like, you see him in the water, and you see him in the sun, and you see him in the, some people see God in the sun, like the sun god Ra, or you see him in the water, like the goddess of water, or you see him in the trees, or you see him in wherever you live, wherever you are, you see like a piece of God in that, right? And so even though you're describing different things in the details, right, in the larger process, you're describing the same effective God and the same, sort of spiritual phenomenon. So you might see and personify God in different ways, but you're all describing the same thing. So see, that's actually a credible argument that you could make. But guess what that derails? It derails the specifics. You would immediately then say, all the details are just people insisting upon themselves and trying to personalize God to their own culture or to their own thing. So you would be half wrong then, because there's no reason then to reduce it to all the details, like, Jesus Christ and this and that. What about Muhammad? What about this? What about, you could always pick your favorite. So every religion is going to have its own little story and own little details and things like that. And so it comes down to a certain form of storytelling and imagination, like the original fiction almost was like that, manifested. And then you also have, like, again, it can manifest differently, like, because Indians live around elephants, they're going to make an elephant god, right? It doesn't mean that God actually would look like an elephant. It doesn't mean that, that that's the truth of it. That just means that they're seeing it in their environment, or more like they're coming up with it based on their environment and something that has to be in front of them. Show me the time when they drew some figure that isn't on Earth anywhere. Well, I mean, you can still imagine stuff, but that isn't based on something like, that you draw a dragon, but a dragon is based on, like, existing somewhere between a dinosaur and a lizard and all this. So you might say, like, where did they come up with that idea? That must mean it must be divine, or, they got it from somewhere else. But you see how the details are always based around something to do with themselves, as in, they're going to insist upon their own environment or something like that. So I barely even watch any clips. It's kind of hard to organize this when you're driving. I don't want to keep talking about religion too much, because I've done this in a couple of sessions already, but I always feel like it's very, very annoying, because that's one of the most basic fallacies of all. And again, that's where my expression comes from, that at some point you sort of give up having the debate because it's pointless. You cannot dissuade with reason what came about by desire, because you could say it a million times, but it doesn't matter. People will just do it because they want to do it, right? It's nothing. It's like with folly, favoritism, entertainment, basically. The main difference with that is, it's not true, but you still spend time on it, you care about it, you get invested in it, just because, it can be good psychologically, it can be a distracting thing, it can be a positive psychological effect, the same way that religion can be. The difference is religion claims to be real, whereas folly, favoritism, like entertainment, does not claim to be real, so you acknowledge it's not real. That's the difference. But it could be a similar interpretation that you shouldn't really need to do that either if your life is truly at peace and a balanced state, but also it's like an overcompensation for something, or the fact that you have to distract yourself, but also it's the fact that you have a situation where here's how you would interpret religion from the perspective that it's similar to folly, favoritism that way, because you could tell people, it doesn't have any impact on your life and it's just a mindless, distraction, but people will still do it, right? That's the thing. So they're not doing it for a place of logic and reason, like they already know that, but they still want to do it anyway, despite that. So, alright, so what do we want to do here? I was watching Dragon Ball and, The Promised Neverland, but I can't seem to stay in a good routine with them, which I don't mind, but, whatever. I can't watch something on a regular basis. I don't mind doing some of these clips. I just kind of keep jumping all over the place, which is fine. That's kind of the part of this format in a way, because you have the ability to, there is no real expectation, but I was kind of trying to make those a regular series. At the very least, they didn't fail by any metric. Like Monk, I didn't stop watching it because of some negative reason, just because, whatever, I sort of have other things that I want to do, so we can always come back to it. I would almost do that if I had more patience. Like, I'd re-watch a series like the 2003 FMA, or like I was talking about Death Note, and I would do like a whole retrospective on it. But actually, I'd rather just watch something new for the first time and get my take on that as I'm watching it. And you might complain that, oh, I talk too much while watching something, but that is sort of the point. This isn't meant to be a review, like you watch it and then you take notes or whatever, mental notes, and then you review it after. This is meant to be more like a reaction, like on the nose, stream of consciousness at the time. And I'm still paying attention to what happens and everything, but, in other words, you're not watching it to watch the thing for free, because I'm not even showing it, but you're also not watching it to watch it for the first time. It's like, oh, you're talking too much, I want to watch the episode, but the assumption is you've already seen the episode, right? It's not really a watch along in that sense. It's like, you've already seen it is the assumption, or you could see it at the same time with a running commentary, which maybe isn't the best way to watch it, but, that's the point, is like, you've already seen it, so now you're not watching to watch the episode again. You're watching to live vicariously through someone else's reaction, I guess, at the time. But this is truly like an invincible content way of doing something. Like where you basically, at first, this is where perfectionism will stop you. This is a good life lesson. I want to do it where I edit it just right, and I put the video in there, and I show certain clips of it, and match up, and sync up, and put the timestamp, and do a perfect thumbnail, and do a perfect, everything's got to be just right. Come up with the best title, come up with the best thumbnail, make sure there's a timestamp, make sure you show the video that you're watching, make sure you sync it up, make sure you, do it just right with the right mic, and you don't do it while driving, and, all these kind of things. But if I had that expectation, then I never would have done it in the first place. So I said, just screw it, let's just try it anyway. And then once we do that, I will, so now I subvert all that, so at least we get to do it in some form, and then I can do that later. That way at least you get to do a period instead of, oh, it has to be perfect, but then you'll never do it. So like, we don't have any timestamp now, I just say it verbally. I don't have any expectation of showing the video that I'm watching. I can just kind of say the name of it. And then I also don't have any expectation of, I don't have any expectation of kind of anything else. I can do all driving, I can do it, shitty mic, I can do it just like that. So you're doing it while driving with the background sound, you're doing it without a proper timestamp, just do it verbally. You're doing it without showing the video, you're just doing it, off what you're verbally saying that you're watching. There's no limit, there's no structure. You can do as much as you want, you can do as little as you want, you can do random things, jump from one thing to the next. And I have all those systems and structures in place, like how I grade the episodes and how I do the character point system, plot armor system, all these different things. So, yeah, so some of the stuff to do with religion is annoying because you can just do this forever. That's the thing. You're never going to convince somebody. You're really not, because you could make the best argument possible. You could just shut down all of their arguments, and it doesn't matter. And that's kind of the whole irony too of the false duality. Very rarely would you see somebody actually arguing against religion in that sense. Like, somebody's gonna argue for the fact that you shouldn't believe in religion, period, and you should be an atheist or whatever. Nobody is really saying that. It's more just that people taking issue with the outward and heavy-handed claims of religion and their sort of outward insistence that they're trying to convert people or whatever. But even beyond that, it's sort of taking a heavy-handed approach to that. Like, all you're doing here is more objective and neutral. You don't have a horse in the race. You're just like, I'm going to shoot down fallacious claims as I see them, and that's what religion is made of. So you're not really arguing for a particular point, whereas with religion, you're defending from a biased, incentivized point. You're already dug in. That's where I always try to play devil's advocate too. Like, I just made a compelling argument for religion that they're all describing the same thing or something similar. So, let's look at some detail of social contrivance here, where it's sort of like the subtlety of it, supposedly. So if you're very base and direct or don't dress it up, all of a sudden that's a negative and that's your fault. But all you're doing is really exposing and revealing the nature of the contrivance process in that way. So that's what people don't like. And so it's sort of like this emperor has no clothes fallacy. You have to dress everything up, so it's more subtle, and then it comes down to the same process anyway. So really what people take issue with is the process itself, but they just want to dress it up so that they're not aware of it. So it becomes the art of constant contrivance, contents of contrivance, the art of dressing it up and being dishonest that way under appearances, etc., overcompensation. So the point is that the process in question is the same. Like there's some incentive, there's some reason, there's some whatever the process behind it is, but the expectation is, you dress it up. So if you simply don't dress it up and don't overcompensate, you're defined by what you don't do rather than what people are doing, because they take what they're doing as a baseline, that's the contrivance state, outward, false, inherent outward contrivance response. And then we can see that this is the thing. Let's use morality as an example. Morality, you might think, is outward, like let's say you're neutral, right? You don't believe in morality or you're not following that. That doesn't mean you'll automatically go out and kill somebody. This is the difference, or do something bad. So morality is outward if you're saying to do something, do something good, give to charity, whatever, like that. And then it's outward in a negative if you go out and, kill people, or we should do this or we should do that, right? The neutral would be you just don't kill people, and you see how that's the same, right? That's the same in both senses, because it's neither positive nor negative. It's right, think about it. It's the pro, not anti dynamic that I talked about in my debate format. If you're pro morality, you're outwardly in favor of it, right? Outwardly practicing it, you would say, let's give to charity and let's help people and let's save their lives, right? And if you're anti-morality, you'd say, let's go out and let's do something negative to people, right? Whatever. But if you're neutral, right, you're not outwardly doing anything. You're just, I'm not going to go out of my way and kill somebody. I'm not going to go out of my way and save somebody. I'm not going to go out of my way and do anything. So you're not really moral. You see how you're just neutral. You're not against it. You're not for it. You're just, going out and hurting somebody or doing something bad is an outward practice. So that would be on the anti-negative side. Right? So again, just because you're neutral and you don't believe in it or don't follow it, doesn't mean that you outwardly would go out of your way and do something on the negative side. Right? You might be more willing to if you had some other reason and motivation, but no, it doesn't mean you'll automatically outwardly do something negative, nor does it mean that you'll do something outwardly positive, because again, you're neutral. So that's the statement. Like, you won't do something negative because you're not moral, but it's an outward practice. So you're not going to do it because you're not negatively moral, and you're not going to help somebody because you're not positively moral, and you're not going to. So it's the same reason, right? On the pro side, you're not going to hurt anybody, not because you're pro morality, just because you're neutral. You're not going to go out of your way to hurt somebody. And the same thing with the negative morality. You're not going to go out of your way to hurt somebody because you're not negatively moral. So you're saying actually the same thing, right? By being neutral, it opens up a whole different perspective for people that they don't realize. So by doing nothing is not an outward position. It's a situation where that's the best way to explain it. You're coming to the same conclusion by that seems to go in both directions, but you're doing it by not doing anything at all. So you're not outwardly insisting upon some sort of external contrivance state. Okay, so here let's do another random YouTube session. I guess I'm doing these sessions a little more irregularly now, which is kind of nice, but first I'll start off by reacting to my own stream here. So it's me, I'm playing back some of my YouTube videos. This is hilarious to do, but I could almost leave it running like 24/7, which would be amazing. Like I could literally just keep switching that would be so cool if I had like another setup. I could almost do that unironically. I would need like another setup with another internet connection, which I don't really have right now, but basically now I'm just doing it whenever I'm not home. But I could do like a 24/7 non-stop stream forever. And you might not think it has a ton of value, and it would be all different content too. Like I have so much. See, I wasn't thinking about this when I first started doing it, I thought I might stream it live as I'm doing it, but now I see the value is basically the same. Since I'm a dead channel and I'm just, nobody's watching anyway, interacting with chat doesn't happen because there is no chat, nobody's really here. It ends up being the same thing. So I'm replaying now part of my Sopranos reaction, episode 7 through 13. And so it should be about a 10-hour total. And so now it's about 6 hours in. So by the time I get home, it might not even be done. I don't like when that happens. I like it to finish in one day, and then even if it runs on too long, like if I didn't get home till late, I would have, it would have restarted. But again, nobody's going to notice or care. So the title that I use, which I use for some of the episodes, Mama Soprano is a Menace, because that's how it culminates and ends. So episode 13 is my last episode that I even watch for the plot armor count reason that Tony gets saved 3 times. Tony plot armor Soprano, and then Mama Soprano is a menace, and Meadow has resting bitch face, which I didn't write out the word bitch all the way, even though I'm saying it here, and I probably say it in the video. I even say the C word in the girls episode, which probably means that, it probably means that I could get banned for that. I don't know if that's a bannable word or not, but I find that fucking hilarious, dude. But see, that was a deserved thing. That was Marnie Michaels. Marnie Michaels decides to... I'm really good with these thumbnails and titles and stuff are pretty funny. Resting B face from episode 9, the worst episode, F grade. That was literally my face when watching it. So let me listen to some of this, and then I'll maybe watch some YouTube videos. Let's see what part we're on. This is probably episode, let me guess, episode 12? If there's a few hours... No, it's probably episode 11 or 10. 11. I'm guessing. 6 hours, 40 minutes in. This is episode 11 where he kills himself. The detective... where he's trying to find out who the mole is or whatever. Because episode 10, I think, I called Sopranos the musical, because that's or maybe I have them backwards. But I think 10 is the musical and 11 is the cop trying to find out the fucking mole, who turns out to be Paulie or somebody who disappears at the end there. But no, it's a good show. I just think it abuses the plot armor count a little bit too much. So I gained 1 follower. I was at 8, now I'm at 9, but I was at 11 before. And I lost 3 followers that one day where I went live three times because it fucked up. It fucked up because probably they saw it go live 3 times and that kind of bothered them. But it's because it kept crashing or something at the beginning, and then it was fine. Yeah, this is this is a free real estate mindset. It doesn't cost me anything to do this. I'm not home anyway. I wouldn't be using my computer anyway, as long as I don't have to upload something, to overlap with this. But it's so just weird. This is really the kind of shit you have to do when you're a small creator, because one of these days you're going to make it. I'm happy with that rate of growth too. If I get 1 follower every couple days, it'll eventually add up. I mean, it's not to be taken lightly. And then the more followers you have, the more credibility it gives you, right? If I had 500 right now, people are more likely to watch just by that token alone. They'll just look at that and be like, oh, there must be something. 500 people can't be wrong, right? The hardest part is when you have 0 or 1, and it's we gotta kill pussy. Not the first time I've said that. I'm just quoting. I can just read back my own reaction. I want Junior to find the guns in the fucking nursing home, but of course, she knew it all along. So why did she take so long to enact the killing then of Tony? Because she would have known that, being the genius that she is, Livia. Right, she would have known this shit. She's right there, and she's not as dumb as she acts. How did she get off with acting like that? You know how she probably got off? Because even when she was probably the real boss behind the father, she was probably still the one pulling the strings and just acting. She probably acted docile most of her life, but she was the real boss. And then now she's acting dumb. right? It's not like she was in the front and being super smart and active. Even when she wasn't supposedly senile, she probably was just, kind of laid back and using somebody else as a figurehead. Tony's secretly in control. I mean, I gotta get back to actually watching something, but I don't even feel like it. Like an actual full series. Yeah, I have a good amount of YouTube content to live off of here, and I could always just keep redoing it, even if I get through all of it, but it would take like probably at least a month or two to get through all of it, because from beginning to end, because I have so much of it. Never mind the fact that I'd be doing the new episode that I, whatever I upload, but I'm really only uploading like one substantial video a week, if even that, like a 12-hour, like a, whatever, if every day I'm doing an hour or 2 hours, then in a week, it's probably like every day on average I'm doing an hour, because some days I'm not doing it at all. So in a week I'm doing like probably 7 hours, so I can do like one full video from that. But no, it's cool to see the chronology of all the different things I've reacted to. The one problem is that I have a focus problem, that I can't stay on one series for a long period of time, because you're able to I'd like to, but it's kind of hard to sometimes. So yeah, it's like 6 hours in. I don't know why I'm even doing this, but you get the worst episode 9, then a couple of good episodes back to back. Musical, then the detective one, basically you're trying to find out who the mole is, and then you have 13 and 14 is that's kind of a good idea for a story. Are there too many movies like that, like a mob musical? That's a great idea. I don't think I've seen too many things like that. So it's like a musical set in a mob kind of format. Or yeah, like Joker 2 was a fucking musical. Which maybe they just weren't clear enough about it, but you have Lady Gaga in it, so of course it has to be because of that. So yeah, I don't know what I even want to watch. I have no idea. I get in these moods where I really want to watch something and then I have no idea. This whole Charlie Kirk, Cliff saga has sort of, in some ways I like debating that, but it also kills my enthusiasm because you realize how utterly stupid people are. And this is more suited kind of content for what I should be doing, right? Never mind discussing my debate formats, Acme, all this kind of stuff, but I'm using folly favoritism as a cover for that, of course, as you have to do in this modern, structure-reduced, half-mass, empirical society, initial-minded basis, of course, all part of my master plan, being a psychology expert. But the point is that get me to 10 followers, bro. You'd be surprised, though. It gives you a certain amount of credibility. That, the more you have, people are more likely to watch for that reason alone. So right now I'm subscribed to Netflix, which maybe I should unsubscribe because I'm not even using it. I was going to do it for the promised whatever the fuck. Well, for Dragon Ball too, but I just can't quite focus, like, in one, I don't know. So I watched the first 2 episodes of both of those. Nothing against them. They were actually both really good. I don't know. I'm reacting to my own reaction to the fucking Sopranos. Okay, let's go on YouTube and just look through some random shit. And the reason why is because I don't know what to watch. Something that you really hate about a guy. When I'm trying to go to the bathroom on 6th Street and they're like, hey, can I ask you a question? Oh, I get it. Because some random guy is interviewing her. I thought she meant like somebody tries to ask her out when she's trying to go to the bathroom. That was pretty funny, I guess. Like when somebody is interviewing us when we're trying to go to the bathroom. but you didn't have to answer him. That's the societal basis you have to have. Don't do this phony sort of pseudo-social contrivance niceness. So you got to keep up appearances and appeal to your vanity, appeal to a person's vanity to control them through the social contrivance, because they don't really care, but they pretend to care because they're accountable. That's a great way to test it, right? You don't really care. People don't really care about social contrivance and being nice or whatever, but they pretend to in the presence of other people around because they don't want to be judged by them, or they want to be favorably seen by them. So you could do a test thing, like somebody interacts with somebody and they'll be ignored if nobody else is around because they have nothing to lose in terms of this little vanity that they're controlled by. But if there are other people around, they'll play along or do something. So you see that that's the whole basis of it. Or even beyond that, they'll lean on like performative aspects, like if they have some whatever, or dependent over extended pretense, like if they have something to gain or they have some preconceived notion that would be valued there. I don't even know how I found that one. Trump can turn any situation into a comedy. These are just random shorts that I'm scrolling through. The stage is falling down, the podium. Okay, dude, okay. You know, my grandpa said I was bragging about my car when I was in college. You really want to have investments, like your personal residence going up in value. I don't know what that means. Like, why doesn't a car go up in value? I'm not even saying what these are because I can barely see the title at the bottom. Who's your favorite superhero? Probably Hulk. This is the kid who asked her, like, how does your hair color change? And the reason why he turned it into an edit. How do your hair colors change? And then she said, they put chemicals in my hair, blah, blah, blah. And then he says, so you dye your hair, basically. And you might think, that makes her look dumb for trying to dumb it down for him. But the way he asked, how do your hair colors change? Why would you ask that then if you knew about dyeing hair? So he kind of set her up. One thing that people on the other side of your street have, grass is greener. They have more grass because he's like a stoner. Happy birthday, Dolly. I don't give a shit about this. In your prime, LeBron and AD versus Shaq and Kobe. That's a tough one but that's the thing about Shaq. I love Anthony Davis, but you can't guard him either. He'll be jacking up threes, and he's, as much as I hate it, he's a fucking amazing jump shooter at times. Like, he's bombing threes, and I don't like seeing that, but the fact that he has the option to, who the hell is going to guard Anthony Davis on the perimeter? Like, Kobe? Like, it makes no sense. So, I'm a little conflicted about that. I don't really know. Like, let me break this debate point down. Kobe Bryant in his prime, right, who was an unbelievable scorer. He could definitely score on LeBron. We saw him do it, countless games against the Cavs and so forth. So there's no question that again, the defense kind of goes off the table here. Anthony Davis can't check Shaq. Shaq really can't guard Anthony Davis, with all due respect, because of the jump shots. Right? He can just play on the perimeter, and he's much faster, very fluid with the ball. We all love Shaq, but he's not going to. It's just a different style, right? A lot of these, like, how is Shaq going to guard Jokic or somebody like this? They just can't do it. He even admits he got cooked by that, what's his name, Big Country somebody, right? Big Country Reeves or somebody. And he would shoot jump shots, and I couldn't deal with it. And he was just like an average player. So imagine what we're dealing with here in the modern era when that's so common. So look, Anthony Davis is going to score his fair share from jump shots. Shaq is going to dominate, obviously, in the paint, as he always does. So I'll give Shaq a minor advantage there. And you might think it should be more than minor, but no. I mean, Anthony Davis is a great player. He is a really good defender too, but it's not going to matter much here, I don't think. nobody could check Shaq. I mean, you had Mutombo, you had whoever you want. Nobody could, even Hakeem. It's funny, people say, oh, Hakeem owned Shaq because he got swept. Look at the numbers and look at that series. Shaq averaged like the same number of points as Hakeem, pretty much. He shot a better percentage. You might say, oh, a lot of that's in garbage time, but Hakeem was out there a lot of the time. So he was more efficient. So think about it like that. Shaq actually was more efficient in that series than Hakeem was by a couple percentage points. So it's almost like, oh, Shaq did a better job guarding Hakeem than Hakeem did guarding Shaq. Now, in reality, they both played really well. But don't tell me that, oh, Hakeem owned Shaq and Hakeem... No. The team was immature. The teams were equally talented, or arguably Orlando might have even been better. But the difference wasn't Hakeem. The difference was like Kenny Smith hitting 7 threes, and it was a maturity issue and a coaching issue, right? And getting swept is a little odd. I'm not giving Shaq a pass, but what I'm saying is, if you actually look at the numbers and the performance, the only thing you might say is, oh, well, it's garbage time. But the whole series was garbage time because, you're getting swept, but some of those games were close. In fact, Orlando was up by quite a bit in a couple of them. So, I'm not saying that Shaq shouldn't bring that home, but I'm also saying, don't tell me that a guy who shot better from the field than you got shut down. Don't tell me that, right? That's nonsense. Nobody could shut Shaq down. Hakeem couldn't shut Shaq down. Dikembe couldn't shut Shaq down. Who's the other one? Ben Wallace couldn't shut Shaq down. People say, oh, Ben Wallace gave him fits. That's why they lost in 5. Meanwhile, Kobe's choking his brains out, shooting less than 40% for the whole series, right? And Shaq is the leading scorer in the whole series, averaging 26 on 60% shooting, highly efficient. Get the fuck out of here with that shit. No, you don't understand what you're talking about. Shaq is unguardable. Nobody ever successfully stopped him in his prime. It's impossible, right? Even some of the games when Shaq's down 15 in the fourth quarter of the 2000. I'm not trying to be mean to Kobe or something, but he's down 15 going into the fourth quarter in the conference finals against the Jailblazers, right? The first year they won the championship. That's a bad-looking moment, but what were the Blazers doing? They were hitting jump shots and stuff. There's nothing Shaq can do about that. They weren't cooking Shaq in the paint, and they weren't stopping Shaq, really, from scoring. It's just that sometimes, if they're hitting jump shots, what do you want the guy to do? So I'm not... I don't know. He's one of the examples of the means argument that I talk about. He's big and he knows it, and he wants to use that. He's not shy about using it to his advantage. So I'm absolutely not happy with game for your life. You might take Shaq over LeBron, even though I rank LeBron higher than Shaq all time. One game for my life, I might take him because it's what the fuck are you going to do with this guy? Just motivate him a little bit, right? And with LeBron, he might be off a little. He's still going to play great. But, there's an if factor, like Steph Curry. What if his shot's just off, right? One game for your life. What if this? What if that? I'm taking Wilt Chamberlain. I'm taking Shaq. You can depend on their height and their size. Just fucking go for it. The real question is, will Wilt give a shit about my life? Will they actually care? But if they care, I got to do the same thing. I'm going to kill you if you... Well, I don't know about that. But I'm just saying, I'll lie to them and make them think it's their life on the line, and that's the only thing I'm worried about is sometimes their motivation, because that's what it feels like. Wilt could have scored 100 points every game, it felt like, if he wanted to. Shaq could have scored 100 points, It feels like that because really, there's nothing you can do, and anything you do is going to leave somebody else open, so it's it really is that helpless. Your strategy literally should be get it to Shaq every single possession. Let Shaq try to score every single possession. If they bring double coverage, let somebody else do it. It's just that simple. He's just that good. So, again, Shaq is going to be a +1 on Anthony Davis in terms of, there's no question Anthony Davis is going to score on him as well from the perimeter with his speed, but also Shaq is going to cook him in the paint. There's nothing you can do. And you can't double Shaq when fucking Kobe's out there, so basically you're fucked. And then Kobe and LeBron is pretty even. I might actually give LeBron a slight edge because, again, his size might... Not that Kobe was small, but I'll consider that one pretty much even because, prime for prime, they're two of the best two-way players ever, so I can't really question them. They're both great defenders, but it's not going to matter. They're not going to shut each other down. There's a chance that LeBron might play a little better because he might score in the paint a little bit easier, whereas Kobe might rely on jump shots a bit, and, he might... But again, I might say he might be off, but this is fucking Kobe we're talking about. It's a little different when you're playing one-on-one. Like, Kobe's a great one-on-one player. So the whole, LeBron's a better passer, LeBron's a better rebounder, none of that shit matters. Rebounding might matter a little bit, but you know what I mean? So in that sense, LeBron is the better player by a small amount, but it's a one-on-one setting, so you're asking for trouble. Like, who the fuck challenges Shaq and Kobe in a one-on-one? The only chance you have is in a 5-on-5 game where, now we got to make Kobe pass and he doesn't want to, or we got to double team Shaq and hope somebody else misses. That's how you deal with those players. So the way you deal with them is directly correlated to why you wouldn't want to play them in a 1v1, because, whereas LeBron, he's going to make the right pass and he's a great passer. Well, that's not going to save you here because you already know who he's going to pass it to. There's only one person, so it doesn't matter as much then. It's predictable. And then Anthony Davis is really great. I'm not going to sleep on him or diminish him at all. But no, I'd say Kobe and LeBron is almost a wash, as much as you might think, Kobe would. Because LeBron is not to be underestimated. Like, whatever Kobe can do, LeBron's going to do it in his own way. He's going to score in the paint a little bit himself. When Shaq is dragged out to the perimeter by Anthony Davis, and Kobe is as great as he is, as big and strong as he is, LeBron can have his way a little bit, posting up and, come on. I mean, he does that to anybody he wants. So, yeah, it's a little... It'd be tough, though. It'd be a tough matchup, but Kobe and Shaq should win a little bit. Do I think or do I know? Man, I'd love to see Shaq and Wilt go against each other. That'd be the coolest matchup ever. Wilt's better in so many... It'd be like one of these humbling youngster moments. Shaq is big and he's got the girth, right? And you think, the raw power, but you don't understand how skilled Wilt Chamberlain really was, or how superhuman of an athlete. People talk about, he's tall. He had a smaller height advantage than Yao Ming. Like, I've explained this in the past. Like, Wilt Chamberlain is the scariest dude you could ever possibly face in your life. Like, this guy, so he would humble you with his skills. He would hit a little, big dipper shot. He'd do a little move. You wouldn't understand what you were dealing with if you were Shaq. Right? You just don't get it. Physically, you might have even more advantages than him, but it just doesn't matter because he has everything. He has the mind for it. He has the psyche, just everything. The skill. Wilt Chamberlain is absolutely unbelievable. So, yeah, you would win that. Obviously, Kareem, you can't forget about. I don't know what these clips even are. I have no idea. She was not wearing the shirt, something. Like, these are all without context. Just whatever random shorts pop into my shit. Let me just say this. Every Marvel movie doesn't end well for the superhero. Everybody dies. Let me just say this. Like, every other Marvel movie doesn't end well for the superhero. Wait till you see this next one. Everybody dies. Mark Ruffalo and Tom Holland got a group together. Mark Ruffalo better something. I don't know what movie he's even talking about, but it must be Don Cheadle in it. Kamala Harris supporter blurted out a statement so foolish, even Charlie Kirk could not hide his anger. When you go to major Republican conservative events, do you face some bias when speaking, or do you actually believe everything that you're saying in a way? Always turns into an attack on the other side. Yet, I never have that labeling, this is my objective nature, which you might think, oh, it's a cop-out, sometimes people try to attack it that way, but it's more nuanced. Like, I can do something while not being fully dug in, or I can not do something while not being completely against it. I think that's just rational, but people like to pigeonhole and label and oversimplify because they're unwilling to be puzzled and they don't want to think. So they take out their desire not to think on you and try to oversimplify you and label you and negate you in fallacious ways. So, like for example, I voted for Trump, obviously here in 2024, but I have a lot of issues with him and I'm not a big fan of him even. So I wouldn't be wearing a Trump hat, or I wouldn't be, saying that, or I wouldn't be able to be pigeonholed like, oh, you're going to be this and that. Right? I wouldn't be able to be put like that. Like, I wouldn't be able to be pigeonholed in the perspective that, oh, you're just a Trump supporter, you wouldn't be able to do that with me. It's like, I did vote for him, but I do have a lot of issues with him. Right? It's just the best case that we have, the best alternative, not even the best, but, I have my reservations. It's like with society itself. This is one thing I actually really dislike when people argue this way, like the climate thing. I pointed out similar things myself, like, how can you say you care about the climate but you're still driving a car and doing this and that? But it's also not a valid argument against the concept, right? So I might attack you that way and say, okay, you're a little hypocrite, you could do a little better things, but it's also a big, larger process argument, like, yes, you live in society, you were indoctrinated, non-choice reaction, you live in society, all of these things, which you might assume, maybe, oh, I lived in a nudist colony, I've lived in a commune, I've lived, minimalistic kind of, Amish kind of thing, right? So if you lived in that, then you have credibility. Does that mean that what you're saying is right? And if you live in society and you still might try to be minimalistic, but always making it about that is unfair, right? Maybe you can best do good by trying to rise up through the system and then changing it that way, but saying like, oh, you drive a car, you use the microwave, or you bought clothing made by this or that, that's not really fair, because the point is, should we care about this subject? Not that what I'm doing about it myself. Right, should we care as a society about this subject? And that's a legitimate thing to ask, because what you have is the ability to consider that, like, we should care about terraforming Mars, but are you doing everything in your power to try to do that? Like, that's not a real thing, because, maybe there's only so much you can do, right? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's a situation where let me try, like this is a great example for me, right? The absolutist philosopher that I am, like, I could say, okay, that philosophy would point to self-governance, but I know that people can't handle it. First of all, there's too many people. Second of all, it doesn't work with such high numbers, village of 100 concept. Number two, so you'd have to conquer the stimuli acme first. But number two, you would also consider the basic simple fact that you're able to, how can I explain? Stimuli acme, like, self-governance, but are people ready for it mentally? Are they capable of it? Do we have the right, we have the potential, but are we in that mindset? So if I could snap my fingers and say, tomorrow, let's self-govern, or let me just, do it myself, live in a little commune, or live in a log cabin away from people, I could maybe do that, but that doesn't make the bigger point. If I'm trying to do it for other people, like, you got to help get people to that point against all the indoctrinated structures. It's not fair to indoctrinate somebody into a society when they're too young to even think for themselves, and then come around and say, well, look, you lived in society your whole life and benefited from it, even though you didn't choose to live there. Like, maybe you wanted to live in the jungle and you'd figure it out once you're old enough. It's not fair to use that against them and say, well, but you benefited from society your whole life, so therefore you can't criticize it. That's a nonsense perspective. So even in this way, like, I'm driving a car, and I'm not one of these climate people, but I'm driving a car, but I can still have my misgivings about the climate and say we should care about it as a country, as a government, as a whole. So there is sometimes an unfair perspective, like, oh, you're just doing it to feel good about yourself. There's no doubt that there's some amount of that, but what if you just have legitimate, like, okay, we want society to cut down and cut back a little bit, and we might not be there yet, but we want to try to get there. So it's the same thing, like, oh, self-governance, we're definitely not ready for it, so I'm not going to argue for it implicitly. That's actually the correct framing, too. Guess what people would consider that argument within their false duality? If I say self-governance, they would say, oh, so you're an anarchist. But an absolutist, distinguished from an anarchist, is actually that you wouldn't feel threatened by established structure. Actually, established structure would feel threatened by you, not because, oh, you're trying to topple it, but because you're indifferent to it and you would pose an alternative that might seem preferable, might not, but self-aware, inherent base state that you're free to judge. So that's the point, is that it would exist independently and doesn't need to tear it down at all, right? The minimalism, the, maximizing something that you have, all of that is consistent, so you would remove the need. You would remove the need for the structure altogether, but you wouldn't be like, oh, we need to tear it down. You would have no interest in it, you wouldn't care, but it would care about you. It would overextend and stop you from doing it, right? So one of them is outward insistence, one of them is inherent practice. So now what you need to understand is, and I can take credit for the creation of absolutism because, yes, the word exists, and some of these concepts I'm not saying have never been said before, but to organize it in this manner, absolutist philosophy is basically my philosophy. I debated it for years, I talked about it, I sort of championed it. So really, when I'm saying it, it's not an established thing, so, you can't say it, but at some point everything has to be established. That's one of my favorite moments ever in a debate. I bring up a fallacy that's one of my own logical razors from my debate format, and somebody says, that's not even an established fallacy. Right, they say that back to the thing, because I name it, and then it's like, my bad. So if something's not you can debate whether it should be considered a fallacy or not, but it's not established. So imagine if you said that when the fallacies were originally, somebody came up with them, some subjective human being must have come up with it. Now you would be like, well, that's not even established yet, so you can't say that. But at some point, somebody had to establish it. So if your basis, it's like one of these circular fallacies itself, where, if something isn't established, therefore it's not valuable, therefore we won't regard it, therefore we won't allow it to become established. But if you did that from the beginning, then nothing would ever become established. It's like saying that, something's not popular, so therefore I'm not going to consider it. But it would never become popular if everyone expected it to be popular first. Somebody has to make it popular, and often that's done by exposure more so than their own personal choice. Like, they just cram it down your throat, like on the radio or whatever, TV, if it's a celebrity. But that's the point. So, like, you can't discredit somebody, really. There's a lot of this, hostile false duality that happens. Like, we should, suppose that was your perspective. We should care about the environment. And again, I'm not perfect. To be aware if it's not to be above it, you would say they're not perfect themselves. But, so does that make you right? So, like, okay, I sewed and stitched my clothes myself, and I got them myself from nature. I extracted the fiber from plants and animals, and I did it in the most minimalistic way possible. And I lived in a commune for years, in a nudist colony, and I came here just to do this interview. And I live a very minimalistic, self-sustaining lifestyle that doesn't harm the environment at all. Does that make me right now? Does that mean that we should do what I'm saying? No, we should still. So you see how you can look at something objectively. The personalization is always stupid. Like, if you were to say, we want to ban guns, but, you're protected by people with guns and your society depends on that. Like, even if that was your take, that's not fair, because you're saying, first of all, you don't even choose that, but you're trying to get to a point where you no longer need them. Now, that might not be practical, but that's besides the point. You can make an argument for something, and you should debate the merits of the argument rather than your personal, anything personal. That doesn't have to do with it. Make the argument for the concept itself, whether it's worth doing or not. Otherwise, don't worry about it, because, man, this is not really what I wanted to do with this right now, but whatever. But no, yeah, don't attack the individual. You might be imperfect. Isn't that what religion talks about too? Like, no one is above sin. So you can be a sinner, but you can still condemn the sin. So what if we make that? Climate change, climate pollution is a sin, hypothetically. So just because you do it too in some minor form doesn't mean that, first of all, they're assuming a lot, but second of all, it's just an unfair premise, because most of what you get, like, oh, where did you get your clothing? Well, like, where do you want me to get it? If I was, I gotta sew it myself, stitch it myself. I've worn the same pair of clothing for 10 years and never gotten another one, right? Like, there is a difference, but there's a lot of these assumptions. I got it from the most sustainable source, or I got it, because then what does that do? Like, you can discredit anybody that way. So the difference is, oh, you don't care, they do care, but you're both hypocrites, or, you're not a hypocrite because you don't pretend to care, whereas they're just pretending. Again, I'm all for trying to discredit people to some extent, but when you do it this way, it doesn't address the actual point, right? The point is, should we care about the environment, yes or no? Should we reduce pollution, yes or no? Should we make this a government policy, etc.? I'm not even saying that we should. I don't even really care about the subject too much. I've always said we'll probably run out of fossil fuels and other things before we even destroy the planet with them too much. And again, when we talk about saving the planet, what is my old expression? It's, we couldn't destroy the planet if we wanted. It survived meteors, it survived the Ice Age, it survived volcanoes, it survived countless things throughout history. So even if we dropped every nuclear bomb that we had, we couldn't destroy the planet. The planet's fine. It was fine before us, it'll be fine after us, right? So it's really our own survivability on it that we care about. So don't get too full of yourself that way. But whatever, here. Of hearing ideas that we might not. I like that she's trying to work for the middle class. I see a lot. What has she or Joe Biden done for the middle class? Not too sure about that. Something to fall for propaganda. He's always being fair. Bad faith actor. What document? I should try to play this along with them. Okay, this is kind of fun. I'll play it in real time. The problem is I have to know strength plus trivia, like where they're holding the thing. But I'm holding the steering wheel. Holding like books or something, they keep getting stacked. Let me try to play it in real time against them, okay? Fuck, what happened? Here we go. How many legs do insects have is the name of the video. It's two people playing. It says 0/9, which means she must have already won. I don't get it. But, okay, here we go. We're starting in 3, 2, 1. Electrical voltage. A watt. Watt volt. Name of the ship. Pilgrims to the New World. The Mayflower. This is kind of fun. Flag of France is white. Red. How many legs do most insects have? 8. Okay, I was wrong at 6. Tallest mammal in the world, giraffe. What does DC stand for? District of Columbia. Actually, District Columbia, because there's no of. Currency is used in Spain. I know it, but... Oh, euro. First, carbon. Hydrogen, okay, fine. Biome. Tundra. I think I got that before you even gave the clue. I think I would have done pretty well there. I think I did pretty well. This is pretty fun, but you have to be honorable and play it in real time. Okay. So here we go. This one is, and I'm not starting maybe from the exact beginning, but it's kind of hard to do this haphazardly like this, but I don't do these sessions anywhere else, so I have no choice but to do it. Like, would I have won that? I guess you could go back and calculate, like, what the other people got. Okay, so this one is called... I guess I'm starting at like 1 second because it's very hard to scroll back. What organ stores urine? But I guess I'm already cheating by doing this. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. Bladder. Okay. 4 over 8 is decimal 1 over 2.5. What do you call large body saltwater? Lake. A sea. Okay, fine. I didn't get it. Lavender. Red. Okay, wrong. Okay, I didn't know that one. 0. Okay, letters in alphabet. I was too slow. They're too fast. Sometimes I'm saying it too, but I'm late. They just keep rattling shit off. What, she almost dropped it and then she didn't? This is kind of a fun format. So they just put a bunch of books on a fucking little thing that they're holding up. And they fucking do it like that. I just like put it on my knees at the end if I'm going to drop it. So how do you stop that? So what you got to do is the simple fact that you're basically able to do the simple fact that you're basically able... Like I would filibuster and just keep talking so they can't do shit. Whatever, this is a fun format. I don't give a shit. Okay, so here I'm watching a filler scene where Vegeta's talking to... Vegeta, Nappa, and Raditz all go to Frieza to report that they took over the planet Chick, right? I won't do the exact timestamp, but there's a couple funny realizations that I just had. First of all, it's one of the most badass kind of mic drop, just iconic things, displays of power, that Nappa goes up to run towards Frieza, Zarbon, and Dodoria, and he says, "You cocky little," and he's running towards them. And they're not even, like, reacting or flinching or moving or doing anything. Everybody in the room, both Vegeta, Raditz, and then obviously Frieza, Zarbon, and Dodoria, on opposite sides of the room, they're not even moving. They don't move an inch. They don't do anything. They don't care. They don't react. It's like a fly coming towards you. Like, you're not even fazed by it. So that's so badass that, like, nobody even gives a shit. You know that you're completely outclassing them, that he can't even faze you. So they're all just sitting there, and then Vegeta has to yell, Nappa, and then Nappa stops. All the while, Zarbon, Dodoria, and Frieza haven't even made an attempt to protect. Zarbon and Dodoria don't even attempt to protect Frieza. Frieza doesn't even attempt to lift a finger. Because you know, right, like you literally don't even have to react to it. It's like a fly coming towards you. You wouldn't even notice. Like, I love it. And they just start laughing maniacally, all three of them. So it's like, it's such a badass display of power. They don't even have to move. It's almost like confusing, right? Nappa almost seems like just, he doesn't even understand. Like, obviously you know they're more powerful, but he doesn't even understand the extent, right, the amount of which you're more powerful. And then you have the ability to consider, like, they don't try to defend Frieza even though that's their job, because they know it's even pointless. You know, there's no need. And Frieza doesn't attempt to even lift a finger because there's also no need. And, you know, they're just, everybody's still. And, like, it's really of no consequence. You know that there's nothing. Like, imagine in a real world setting, like, a guy runs towards the king with, like, a spear, right, that could potentially hurt him or kill him. You know, you have the guards would react, or there'd be some flinch. Nobody even flinches, because you know it's completely futile. And they start laughing at him, and then he stops when Vegeta yells at him, like it's completely... I love it. It's such a mockery that you're making out of them. And then later on, Zarbon says, "What more can you expect from a monkey?" And then he starts laughing, but only he's laughing. Frieza isn't laughing, Dodoria isn't laughing. You can only hear Zarbon laughing for several seconds, like, so what, they didn't find it funny? So it's kind of like, oh, Zarbon with his casual racism, although Frieza's a racist. That's almost more a line that Frieza would say. But Zarbon with his jokes that only he laughs at, or with his casual racism that only he finds funny, right? Frieza and Midori, I can just imagine sitting there, not really giving a shit, not really finding it funny, as he's laughing at his own joke and everybody else is silently, awkwardly just sitting there. And then this is a badass speech here, when the filler is actually better than the fucking show, where is a bit of an absolutist worthy quote. And this clip is on the semen retention channel, which I found that's hilarious. You're assuming that, it's all like badass quotes by people about not having sex. You assume that Vegeta's only you got to put me to explaining the stimuli acme on the semen retention channel. An absolutist may remove the need by jacking off, though, if whether that counts or not. But you certainly wouldn't simp for women, or everything else is just a delusion for the weak. Like, look at this moment, though. This is one of the best moments in the whole franchise. And, it's filler, it's filler. Why does it have to be filler? There's nothing that contradicts anything else. Right? Why does this have to be filler? I know how strong Frieza is, even though he doesn't, and he's always surprised by his transformations. But no, he's on the semen retention channel with the speech, right? And he's saying this like Frieza couldn't potentially be hearing this or overseeing this exactly as I was meant to. I love that it ends up on the semen retention. But no, let's look at an absolutist semen retention. You wouldn't pursue it within the stimuli acme, or you would have to vouch for the stimuli acme state. You would just have to be consistent in your measure. It's not saying for sure what you would do. So you would either remove the need for the stimuli acme basis by either chopping your dick off or somehow making yourself doing some surgery or other thing to make you not have to worry about that, or you could jack off to remove the need, or you could still have sex but wear protection and not have kids, or you could not be beholden to the stimuli acme and be self-controlled despite that, or use it to your advantage potentially somehow, or you could have kids still, but you vouch for this contrivance state, remove the need, no contrivance, commune, nudist colony, etc., or self-governance, or you could vouch for the stimuli acme state, and the way that you could vouch for the stimuli acme state is by having children, according to it, and potentially even the contrivance state, although more likely you would just remove the need for it altogether. Live in a minimalistic way, again, nudist colony, commune, etc., minimalistic lifestyle, etc. So there's a number of ways you could be consistent in that, but you may think, okay, an absolutist might jack off to remove the need for something, and the reason why is because that would be one option, or you could just not have sex at all, but then it may serve still as a distraction to you. Or, again, you could do it in a casual, open relationship way or in a laid-back way. Or you could just not be beholden to it. Or, again, you could even use it to your advantage, have sex for some benefit, potentially. Or, again, you could have some surgery. Or you could, again, remove the need by masturbating. Or just not have sex at all. Or vouch for the contrivance state. Or remove the need for the contrivance state. Or use protection, etc. Or you could use the stimuli acme. Vouch for the stimuli acme state, likely, again, in a minimalistic lifestyle that removes the need for the overextension. So you would be accountable to be consistent in any of those scenarios.